When a desperate woman's arrow slices through the canyon twilight, hardened survivor Wade Carter does the impossible. He catches it mid-flight with his bare hand. But in the brutal frontier where ancient laws still reign, that single act just sealed both their fates. Now hunters are coming, tradition demands blood or bondage, and two broken souls must choose between survival and freedom. This is a story about defiance in the harshest land, where one man's refusal to own another human being will ignite a confrontation that changes everything. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The Canyon Country didn't forgive mistakes. Wade Carter had learned that truth the hard way, carved it into his bones through 15 winters of solitary survival in a land that killed the weak and humbled the strong. The sun hung low over the red rock walls, bleeding orange and crimson across the jagged horizon as his horse picked its way along the narrow trail home. Dust devils danced in the distance, and somewhere a hawk screamed its lonely challenge to the coming night. Wade rode with his hat pulled low, his weathered hands loose on the reins. At 43, his face was a map of hard years, deep lines bracketing a mouth that rarely smiled, gray threading through dark hair, eyes the color of winter ice that had seen too much and forgotten nothing. He'd come to this remote corner of the frontier to escape the ghosts of his past, to find peace in isolation. Instead, he'd found something harder: survival without purpose, existence without meaning. The cabin waited 3 miles ahead, tucked into a box canyon where a spring provided water year-round. It wasn't much. Rough timber walls, a stone chimney, a small corral for his horse, and the 2 mules that hauled supplies from the distant trading post twice a year. But it was his, and in this unforgiving country, that meant everything. The arrow came out of nowhere. 1 second the trail ahead was empty, painted in the amber light of dying day. The next, a shaft of wood and feather was streaking toward his chest, silent and deadly as a striking rattlesnake. Most men would have died right there, pinned to their saddle before they even registered the threat. Wade Carter wasn't most men. Instinct born from decades of frontier living took over. His hand snapped up, fingers closing around the arrow shaft 6 inches from his chest. The impact drove him back in the saddle, the force enough to bruise his palm, but the point never touched him. For a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, he sat frozen, staring at the trembling arrow clutched in his fist. His horse shied sideways, nostrils flaring at the scent of danger. Wade's other hand steadied the animal while his eyes swept the rocks, searching for the archer. The canyon walls threw back only silence and shadow. Then she emerged. She came stumbling from behind a tall boulder 30 yards to his left, and Wade's first thought was that she looked more dead than alive. Young, maybe 25, with long dark hair matted with dust and blood, wearing buckskin pants and a torn shirt that might have been gray once but was now mostly brown with dirt and darker stains. She carried a bow in one hand, but it hung loose at her side, forgotten. Her other hand pressed against her ribs, and even from this distance Wade could see the crimson seeping between her fingers. She took 3 steps toward him and collapsed. Wade's hand dropped to the pistol at his hip, old habit screaming warnings. This could be a trap. Raiders sometimes used wounded women as bait, hiding in the rocks until a good Samaritan stopped to help. But his eyes swept the surrounding stone again and found nothing. Just the girl crumpled in the dust and the lengthening shadows of approaching night. He dismounted in one fluid motion, keeping his gun hand free, and approached on foot. The girl hadn't moved. Up close he could see she was barely breathing, her face pale beneath the dirt, lips cracked and bleeding from dehydration. The wound in her side looked several days old, infected and angry. Wade holstered his pistol and knelt beside her. Her eyes fluttered open, brown, fever-bright, filled with a strange mixture of fear and resignation. "Easy," he said quietly, the first word he'd spoken aloud in 3 days. His voice came out rough from disuse. "I'm not going to hurt you." Her gaze focused on the arrow still clutched in his other hand. Something flickered across her face, shock, maybe, or disbelief. Her lips moved, forming words too soft to hear. Wade leaned closer. "What?" You caught it." Her voice was barely a whisper, thick with an accent he couldn't place. "The arrow. You actually caught it. Lucky reflex."
He set the arrow aside and reached for his canteen. How bad are you hurt? But she wasn't listening. Her eyes had gone wide, staring at him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. No, she breathed. Not luck. Never luck. The old law. You caught my arrow. That means... She fainted before she could finish. Wade caught her before her head hit the rocks.
For a long moment, he crouched there, an unconscious woman in his arms, trying to decide what to do. The smart move would be to ride on, leave her for whoever was chasing her, because someone was definitely chasing her. Women didn't end up this far into the backcountry, wounded and alone by accident. But 15 years of self-imposed isolation hadn't completely killed his humanity. Not yet. With a sigh that held the weight of a decision he suspected he'd regret, Wade lifted her carefully and carried her to his horse. She weighed almost nothing, all bone and sinew beneath the filthy buckskin. He managed to get her draped across his saddle, then swung up behind her, one arm around her waist to keep her from falling. The sun had touched the western rim of the canyon by the time he reached the cabin. Wade dismounted, carried the girl inside, and laid her on his narrow bed, the only bed. She hadn't stirred during the ride, which worried him more than he wanted to admit. He lit the oil lamp and got his first good look at her wound. The arrow, not hers he realized, but someone else's, had punched clean through her side just above her hip bone. Someone had broken off the shaft and pulled it through, probably her, judging by the crude job. But the wound had festered, the flesh around it swollen and hot to the touch. Wade had treated enough wounds to know this one needed more than whiskey and hope. He built up the fire, set water to boil, and gathered his medical supplies, such as they were. Then he set to work. She woke up screaming when he cleaned the wound with alcohol. Her hands clawed at his arms, surprising strength in her fevered thrashing. Wade pinned her wrists gently but firmly. "Stop fighting me," he said, keeping his voice level and calm. "I'm trying to help." Her eyes found his, wild with pain and fear. For a moment he thought she'd keep struggling. Then, slowly, the fight drained out of her. She went limp against the bed, tears cutting clean tracks through the dirt on her face. "That's it," Wade murmured. "Just breathe. Worst part's almost over." He packed the wound with herbs he'd learned to use from an old trapper years ago. Yarrow to stop bleeding, golden seal to fight infection. She whimpered but didn't pull away. When he finally wrapped clean bandages around her torso, her breathing had settled into something almost steady. "Thank you," she whispered. Wade stood, washing his hands in the basin. "Don't thank me yet. That infection's deep. You've got a hard few days ahead. Better than the alternative." She tried to sit up and failed, falling back with a gasp. "Don't move!" Wade brought her water, lifted her head so she could drink. She gulped it desperately, and he had to pull the cup away before she made herself sick. "Slow, little sips." She obeyed, eyeing him over the rim of the cup. "Why did you help me? Why did you shoot at me?" "I thought..." She looked away. "I thought you were one of them." "One of who?" "The riders. Kyl's men." Her voice dropped to barely audible. "They've been hunting me for 8 days." Wade pulled up a chair, turned it backward, and straddled it, resting his arms on the back. "You want to tell me why?" She was quiet for so long he thought she might refuse. Then, haltingly, the story came out. Her name was Kayla Voss. She'd grown up in a settlement 3 days' ride north of here, a place where the old ways still held power, ways Wade thought had died out decades ago, ways that treated women as property, to be claimed and traded like horses or land. "There are rules," Kayla said, her voice flat and bitter. "Ancient rules that no one questions. If a man catches a woman's arrow, catches it, not just deflects it, it creates a bond. A claim." She looked at him, and her eyes held a depth of weary knowledge that aged her beyond her years. "You caught my arrow, Wade Carter. By the old law, I'm yours now." Wade felt something cold settle in his gut. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard." "Ridiculous or not, they believe it. Kyle and his riders, they enforce the old ways. They'll come for you now, to make sure the bond is honored. Let them come." Wade stood, walked to the window. Full dark had fallen, and stars were emerging in the clear sky. "I don't care about your old ways. You're free to leave whenever you're well enough." "You don't understand." Kayla's voice carried a note of desperation. "It doesn't matter what you want. The law says you caught my arrow. That makes you responsible for me, whether you claim me or not. If you refuse, they'll kill you for breaking tradition. If you try to send me away, they'll hunt me down and—" She trailed off, but Wade could fill in the blanks. "So what are you saying? I'm supposed to just accept some primitive claim on another human being?" "I'm saying you saved my life tonight, and now I've trapped you in mine." Tears glistened in her eyes. "I'm sorry. I never meant— When I shot that arrow, I was desperate and starving, and I thought you were them. I never imagined anyone could actually catch it. No one catches arrows. It's supposed to be impossible." Wade turned from the window, studying her in the lamplight. Beneath the dirt and exhaustion and pain, he could see intelligence in those brown eyes, and something else, a core of steel that hadn't been broken despite whatever she'd endured. "How'd you get away from them in the first place?" Kayla's jaw tightened. "Cale wanted me for his own. Said the old law gave him the right because his father and mine made an agreement before I was born. I refused. So he took me anyway, held me in his compound for 3 months." Her hands clenched the blanket. "I waited until the new moon when it was darkest. Stole a bow, a horse, some supplies. Made it 2 days before they caught up with me the first time." "That when you got the arrow in your side?" She nodded. "I killed the man who shot me, took his weapons, and ran. Been running ever since, circling back, trying to lose them. But Kael's riders are the best trackers in 3 territories. They don't give up." Wade processed this information, his mind working through possibilities and consequences. Outside, a coyote called, lonely and distant. His horse nickered softly from the corral. "These riders," he said finally. "How many?" "Kael usually travels with 5 or 6. All of them good with guns and better with blades. All of them absolutely loyal to the old ways." She met his eyes. "I've brought death to your door, Wade Carter. I'm sorry for that, but I won't ask you to fight them. Give me a day to rest, and I'll leave before they find this place. You can barely sit up. You won't make it a mile. Then I'll die free." Simple words, but the conviction behind them was absolute. Something shifted in Wade's chest, some wall he'd built 15 years ago developing its first crack. He'd come to this canyon to be alone, to never again care about anyone or anything beyond his own survival. He'd buried his wife and daughter in the cold ground back east, buried his heart with them, and rode west until he found a place remote enough that the memories couldn't follow. But looking at this young woman, this stranger who'd stumbled into his life with a desperate arrow and an impossible claim, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not attraction, not romance, but recognition. She was running from ghosts just like he was, trying to survive in a world that wanted to break her. "You'll stay," he heard himself say, "at least until you're healed. Then we'll figure out what to do about these riders." "Wade, I don't accept any claim," he said firmly, "old law or new. You're not property, and I'm not interested in owning anyone. But I'm not sending a wounded woman out into the night to die either. So you'll stay, you'll heal, and we'll deal with whatever comes." Kayla stared at him for a long moment. "You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the biggest fool." "Probably both." Wade moved to the door, checked the latch. "Get some sleep. I'll keep watch. There's only one bed. I've slept in worse places than a chair." He settled into the rocking chair by the fire, his rifle across his knees, and watched the flames dance while Kayla's breathing gradually deepened into something that might have been real sleep. The night stretched out, quiet except for the pop and crackle of burning wood. Wade didn't sleep. Instead, he thought about the arrow still lying on his table, the impossible catch that had somehow bound his fate to this stranger's. He thought about riders coming to enforce laws that belonged to a darker age. He thought about his wife's smile, his daughter's laugh, and how he'd sworn never to care about anyone again because the pain of loss was too much to bear. And he thought about how, despite all his careful isolation, all his years of running from connection, life had found him anyway. Not with a gentle knock, but with an arrow out of the sunset, a wounded woman, and the promise of violence to come. Around midnight he heard it, faint but distinct in the desert stillness. Hoofbeats, multiple horses, moving along the canyon trail. Wade eased out of his chair, moved to the window, and peered through a gap in the shutters. 5 riders silhouetted against the stars, moving slow and careful. Tracking. They passed within 100 yards of the cabin, close enough that Wade could hear their voices, low and purposeful. One of them dismounted, studying the ground even in the darkness. After a moment, the tracker shook his head, and they moved on, following the main trail deeper into the canyon. Wade waited until the hoofbeats faded completely before returning to his chair. Across the room, Kayla's eyes gleamed in the firelight. "You saw them," she whispered. "Yeah. They'll find the horse tracks tomorrow, leading here. Probably." "Wade, sleep, Kayla. We'll deal with tomorrow when it comes." But sleep didn't come for either of them. They lay in their separate spaces, listening to the night, waiting for the dawn, and whatever it would bring. The riders returned 2 hours after sunrise. Wade was outside, tending to his animals, when he heard them coming. 5 men on horseback, riding hard now that they'd picked up the trail. He straightened slowly, keeping his hands visible and away from his gun. The lead rider was tall and broad-shouldered, maybe 50 years old, with iron-gray hair and a face like weathered granite. He rode with the confidence of a man who'd never been successfully challenged, and the others followed him like a wolf pack following its alpha. They reined up 20 feet from Wade's porch, spreading out in a loose semicircle. The leader's eyes swept the cabin, the corral, the small signs of Wade's solitary life. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "I'm looking for a woman. Dark hair, about 25, traveling alone, wounded. You seen anyone like that?" Wade met his gaze without flinching. "Might have. Who's asking?" "Name's Cale Thorne. This is my territory, and that woman is my property under the old law. She's a runaway, and I mean to bring her back." "Your property?" Wade let the words hang in the air, flat and cold. "Interesting way to talk about a human being." Cale's eyes narrowed. "The old ways may not mean much to you, stranger, but in this part of the country, they're the only law that matters. Her father promised her to me before she was even born. That makes her mine. And if she doesn't agree?" "A woman's agreement isn't required." Cale shifted in his saddle, and Wade caught the deliberate movement, making sure his pistol was visible. "Now, I'm going to ask you one more time, politely. You seen this woman or not?" Wade considered his options. He could lie, but the tracks leading to his door told their own story. He could fight, but 5 against 1 was suicide, even for a man who'd spent years honing his survival skills. Or he could tell the truth and see where it led. Before he could answer, the cabin door opened. Kayla stood in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame, the other pressed to her bandaged side. She'd washed her face and hands, and in the morning light, Wade could see she was younger than he'd thought, and prettier, with high cheekbones and large eyes that blazed with defiance despite her obvious pain. "I'm here, Kael," she said, her voice steady and clear. "But I'm not going back." Kael's face transformed, anger replaced by something that might have been satisfaction. "There she is? Kayla, girl, you've led us on quite a chase. Cost me a good man, too, the one you killed down by Rattlesnake Creek. He shot me first. He was doing his duty." Cale dismounted, and his men followed suit, forming a loose line behind him. "Now we can do this easy or hard. Easy means you come back with me now, accept your place, and we forget this foolishness. Hard means she's not going anywhere." The words were out of Wade's mouth before he'd consciously decided to speak them. Every eye turned to him, and he felt the weight of their attention like a physical thing. Kael studied him with new interest. "That's so. And who might you be to interfere?" "Wade Carter. This is my land, my cabin. The woman's under my protection." "Protection." Kael's laugh was harsh and humorless. "You think you can protect her from me and mine? From the old law?" Wade took a step forward, closing the distance. "I don't give a damn about your old law. Where I come from, people aren't property. They make their own choices. Where you come from doesn't matter. You're in my territory now." Kael's hand dropped to his gun. "Last chance, Carter. Step aside or I'll move you aside." Wade's hand hovered near his own weapon, his mind calculating angles and odds, 5 against 1. Maybe he could drop 2 before they killed him. 3 if he was lucky. But Kayla would still end up in Kael's hands, and she'd die slow for the trouble she'd caused. "Wait!" Kayla's voice cut through the tension. She moved forward, each step obviously painful. "Kael, there's something you need to know." "What's that?" She raised her chin, and Wade saw something flicker across her face, Calculation, determination, maybe a hint of hope. He caught my arrow. The effect was immediate and profound. Every one of Kael's men went still. The leader's face drained of color, then flushed red. What did you say? Yesterday, at sunset, I shot an arrow at him, thinking he was one of your men. He caught it, with his bare hand. Kayla's eyes locked with Wade's, and he saw a message there he couldn't quite decipher. You know what that means, Kael. By the oldest law of all, the one even you can't break. He has first claim. Kael's jaw worked silently. Behind him, his men exchanged glances, their aggressive postures shifting to uncertainty. That's not possible, Kael finally managed. No one catches arrows. It's a children's tale, a legend from... Show him, Kayla said to Wade. Wade walked to the cabin, aware of every eye following him. He retrieved the arrow from where he'd left it on the table and brought it back, holding it up in the morning light. This what you shot at me? He asked Kayla. Yes? He tossed it to Kael, who caught it automatically. The older man examined it, his expression growing darker by the second. It's undamaged, one of Kael's men said quietly. If it hit anything solid, the tip would be blunted. But it's perfect. He could have caught it after it passed him, Kael argued, but his voice lacked conviction. From behind? Kayla shook her head. At full draw, 40 yards? Even if he'd tried, he'd have been hit first. You know the law, Kael. You've enforced it yourself dozens of times. A man who can catch a woman's arrow has proven himself worthy of the claim, proven himself stronger than even the arrow itself. Wade felt like he'd stepped into some fever dream. Now hold on! But Kael was already backing toward his horse, his men following. This isn't over, he said, though his voice lacked its earlier authority. The council will have to rule on this. If what she says is true, if you really caught it, they'll need to see proof. I don't want Wade started. 3 days, Kael interrupted. The Full Moon Council meets in 3 days at Redstone Canyon. You'll both attend and present your case. Until then, he swung into his saddle. Until then, the claim is contested. No one touches either of you. Old law. They rode off in a cloud of dust, leaving Wade and Kayla standing in the dooryard, the morning sun climbing higher, warming the air. Wade waited until the hoofbeats faded completely before turning to Kayla. What the hell just happened? She swayed, and he caught her before she fell. Up close, he could see the toll the confrontation had taken. Her face was pale, sweat beading on her forehead, her breathing shallow and rapid. Bought us time, she gasped. 3 days, maybe enough to figure out. She fainted again, and Wade carried her back inside, laid her on the bed, checked her bandages. The wound had started bleeding again, fresh red seeping through the cloth. He changed the dressing, gave her water when she stirred, watched her slip back into fevered sleep. Then he sat in his chair and stared at the arrow lying on his table, the impossible catch that had somehow bought them 3 days. 3 days to figure out a solution to a problem he still didn't fully understand. 3 days before he'd have to face some counsel and defend a claim he didn't want against a man who thought women were property. Outside, the canyon country stretched away in all directions, beautiful and brutal and utterly indifferent to human troubles. Wade had chosen this life specifically to avoid complications, to escape the pain of caring about people. But life, it seemed, had other plans. The afternoon passed in tense quiet. Kayla woke twice, drank water, asked no questions. Wade tended the animals, checked the perimeter, and tried not to think about what would happen in 3 days. As the sun began its descent toward the western rim, painting the canyon walls in shades of amber and crimson, Kayla finally spoke. I'm sorry. Wade looked up from the knife he'd been sharpening. For what? For dragging you into this. For using the old law against you, the same law I've been running from. She sat up slowly, wincing. But I was desperate. If Kael had taken me back, he would have... There are things worse than death, Wade. Things I won't go back to. Wade set down the knife and whetstone. This council. What happens there? They'll ask you to demonstrate the catch. If you can do it again, if you can prove you really caught my arrow, then by the oldest law you have the superior claim. Kael would have to acknowledge it. And if I can't prove it, then it's my word against his, and... She looked away. The council is made up of old men who believe in the old ways. They'll side with Kyle. What if I just refuse to participate? Take you somewhere safe, away from all this? Kayla shook her head. There is nowhere safe. Kyle's influence reaches across 3 territories. He has allies, riders who owe him favors. We could run for years and never truly escape. The only way out is through. Wade stood, paced to the window. The same window where he'd watched Kyle's riders pass in the night. The same window he'd stood at 1,000 times before, watching the empty canyon and feeling the solitude like a balm on old wounds. I don't want to own you, he said quietly, or claim you, or whatever these people call it. You understand that? I do. But I also won't send you back to be treated like property. I know. He turned to face her. So we go to this council. I prove I caught the arrow, somehow. And then what? What does that actually mean for you? Kayla was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. Traditionally, it means you have the right to take me as a wife, or a servant, or... She swallowed hard. Or whatever you want. The law doesn't specify. It just says that the bond is absolute, the claim unbreakable. That's insane. That's the frontier. These laws came from a time when survival meant strong men protecting their families by any means necessary, when women traded freedom for safety because the alternative was death in a brutal land. Her voice carried a bitter edge. The world has changed. The laws haven't. Wade returned to his chair, his mind working through the problem from every angle. There has to be a way to use this law to set you free instead of just transferring your cage from one man to another. If there is, I haven't found it. Kayla lay back, exhaustion winning. I've thought about it every day for 3 months. The old law is absolute. Once the claim is acknowledged, it's binding until death. Until death. The words echoed in Wade's mind as night fell again, as he took up his position in the rocking chair and watched the fire burn down to embers. Kayla slept fitfully, sometimes calling out in her dreams, words in a language he didn't know. The second day passed much like the first. Wade hunted, brought back a rabbit, made a stew. Kayla grew stronger, able to walk around the cabin without help, though she still moved carefully. They didn't talk much. What was there to say? In a day and a half, they'd ride to Redstone Canyon and face a council of men who believed women were property. Wade would perform an impossible feat he'd already done once by pure instinct and luck. And then, what? On the evening of the second day, as they sat by the fire eating their meager dinner, Kayla asked the question Wade had been expecting. Why are you helping me? Really? Wade took his time answering, chewing slowly, watching the flames dance. I had a family once, he said finally. Wife named Sarah, daughter named Emma. Cholera took them both in the same week, 10 years back. He set down his bowl. I came west to forget. Built this cabin, carved out a life that didn't require caring about anyone. Thought I'd succeeded. But then a half-dead woman shot an arrow at me, and I caught it, and suddenly I'm right back in the middle of someone else's suffering. He met her eyes. Maybe I'm helping you because I couldn't save them. Maybe it's just that I'm not quite as dead inside as I thought I was. Or maybe, he smiled without humor, I'm just stubborn enough to hate being told what to do by men who think they can own people. Kayla returned the smile, and for the first time Wade saw what she might look like without the weight of fear and pain. All good reasons. What about you? What will you do when we get you free of this? She looked surprised, as if no one had ever asked her that before. I don't know. I've spent so long just trying to survive, I never let myself think past escape. Her gaze drifted to the window, to the star-filled sky beyond. Maybe I'd find a town where the old laws don't reach. Start over, learn a trade, live a life that's actually mine. That's a good dream. It's all I have. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. 2 people bound by impossible circumstances, finding common ground in shared defiance. The third day dawned clear and cold. Wade woke before sunrise, fed the animals, and prepared for the journey. Kayla emerged from the cabin dressed in clean clothes Wade had found in an old trunk, his wife's clothes. From a life so long ago it felt like someone else's memory. They fit Kayla well enough, and seeing her in them didn't hurt as much as Wade expected.
They rode out together as the sun cleared the eastern horizon, Wade on his horse and Kayla on one of the mules.
The journey to Redstone Canyon would take most of the day, following trails Wade knew by heart. Neither spoke much. The weight of what lay ahead seemed to fill all the space around them. By late afternoon, they reached the canyon. Wade had been here before years ago, trading with some of the settlers who still clung to the old ways. The meeting ground was a natural amphitheater carved into the red rock, with a spring at its center and enough space for maybe 50 people. Today, it looked like the entire territory had turned out. Wade counted at least 30 men, some with their families, all arranged in a loose circle around the spring. Cale Thorne stood at the far end, surrounded by his riders, radiating authority and barely controlled anger. When Wade and Kyla appeared at the canyon's entrance, conversation died. An old man stepped forward, ancient and bent, but with eyes that still held keen intelligence. This would be the council elder, Wade guessed, the one who would judge. "Wade Carter," the old man called, his voice surprisingly strong. "Kayla Voss, come forward and state your case before the council." They dismounted and walked into the circle. Wade felt every eye on them, felt the weight of tradition and expectation pressing down like a physical force. The elder studied them both. Kyle Thorne has brought a complaint. He claims Kayla Voss as his rightful property under an agreement made before her birth. Kayla contests this claim, saying you, Wade Carter, hold a superior claim under the law of the caught arrow. He paused. "This is a serious matter. If your claim is false, the penalty is death. If it's true, Kyle must accept it or face exile. Do you understand?" "I understand," Wade said. "Then prove your claim. Show us you can catch an arrow in flight, and the bond will be recognized." Wade looked at Kayla. She met his eyes, and in them he saw trust, something fragile and precious that she was placing entirely in his hands. He turned back to the elder. "I'll need someone to shoot." "I will." Kyle stepped forward, bow in hand, his face a mask of controlled rage. "If he fails, I want the satisfaction of knowing my arrow killed the man who tried to steal what's mine." The crowd murmured, but the elder nodded. "It's his right." "Wade Carter, are you ready?" Wade walked to the center of the circle, his heart hammering but his hands steady. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a calm voice whispered that this was insane, that no one could catch arrows, that the first time had been impossible luck, and trying it again was suicide. But then he thought about Kayla, about the life she'd lived in fear and bondage, about the future she deserved. He thought about Sarah and Emma, about all the people in his life he'd failed to save. And he thought about the old men in this circle, so certain they had the right to decide a woman's fate. Sometimes, he realized, you just had to believe in impossible things. "I'm ready." Kyle knocked an arrow, drew the bowstring back to his ear. 40 yards separated them, the same distance as that first shot. The crowd held its breath. Time seemed to slow. Wade saw the arrow release, saw it arc through the air, a dark line against the blue sky. Every instinct screamed at him to dodge, to dive, to get out of the way. Instead, he raised his hand and waited. The arrow came like a striking hawk, fast and true, aimed directly at his heart. Wade's fingers moved before his brain consciously decided, closing around the shaft. The impact drove him back a step, the force enough to numb his entire arm. For one terrible second, he thought he'd failed, thought the arrow had slipped through his grasp. Then he held it up, and the crowd erupted. Wade stood in the center of Redstone Canyon, holding Kyle's arrow, his hand throbbing with pain and his heart thundering in his chest. He'd done it. Against all odds, against all logic, he'd caught an arrow for the second time in 3 days. Around him, the crowd roared, some cheering, others shouting in disbelief, a few in anger. But over it all, Wade heard Kayla's voice, raw with emotion and relief, calling his name. The elder raised his hands for silence. Slowly, grudgingly, the noise died down. "The law has spoken," the old man declared. "Wade Carter has proven his claim. By the oldest law, the law of the caught arrow, Kayla Voss is his." Wade looked at Kayla, at the tears streaming down her face, at the complex mixture of relief and fear in her eyes. Relief that she was free from Kyle, fear of what Wade might demand now that the claim was his. He made his decision. "No," Wade said quietly. The crowd went silent. Even the elder looked stunned. What did you say? Kale demanded. Wade walked to where Kayla stood and held out the arrow to her. I said no. I don't accept the claim. You can't refuse, the elder said, his voice shaking. The law is absolute. You've proven yourself worthy. The bond is binding. Then I break it. Wade kept his eyes on Kayla. I don't want to own her. I don't want to claim her. She's her own person, and she deserves to choose her own life. If your law can't accommodate that, then your law is wrong. The canyon erupted again, this time in chaos. Men were shouting, arguing, some reaching for weapons. Kyle's face had gone purple with rage, and he was advancing on Wade with murder in his eyes. But before violence could erupt, Kayla stepped between them. Wait! Her voice cut through the tumult like a blade. There is a way, a precedent in the old law that everyone has forgotten. The elder's eyes narrowed. What precedent? The law of the caught arrow says the man has the claim, Kayla said, speaking fast, her voice ringing with desperate hope. But it doesn't say the woman has no rights. It says the bond is absolute. Not that the woman becomes property, but that the two are bound. Bound means protected. Bound means, she turned to Wade, her eyes pleading for understanding. It means partnership, not ownership. Mutual protection under the old law. The elder considered this, his ancient brow furrowed. There may be truth in that interpretation. The oldest texts speak of binding, not buying, of bonds freely maintained, not chains forcibly imposed. This is nonsense, Kael shouted. The law is clear. She belongs to whoever holds the claim, and if Carter won't take her, then my claim stands. No. The elder's voice carried finality. Young Kayla is right. I've studied the old texts since before you were born, Kale Thorne, and the original law speaks of protection and partnership. It was meant to honor warriors who proved themselves worthy, not to enslave women. He looked at Wade and Kayla. If Wade Carter accepts the bond as protection rather than ownership, and if Kayla Voss accepts his protection freely, then the law is satisfied. Wade felt hope kindle in his chest for the first time in days. And if we both accept those terms, then you are bound by law, but as partners, not as master and property. Any man who harms either of you harms both, and must answer to the council. Any woman who contests Kayla's freedom contests Wade's claim, which has been proven before witnesses. The elder smiled, and suddenly he looked less ancient and more amused. It's actually quite elegant, if we interpret it correctly. Kale was breathing hard, fists clenched, clearly torn between attacking and accepting. Finally, he spat into the dust. This isn't over, Carter. Council law may protect you here, but out in the territories, the law still holds, the elder interrupted. I'll send word to every settlement within 3 days' ride. Wade Carter and Kayla Voss are bound by law and under council protection. Any man who violates that protection will be exiled and outlawed. Is that clear? Kale's jaw worked silently. Then, without another word, he turned and stalked toward his horse. His riders followed, and within moments they were gone, leaving only dust hanging in the still air. Wade turned to Kayla. Is that really how it works? We're partners? Under their law? If we both agree to it, yes. She searched his face. Do you agree, Wade? To the bond, not the claim. To protection without ownership. He thought about his isolated cabin, his carefully constructed solitude, his years of running from connection. And then he thought about this woman who'd stumbled into his life with impossible timing and even more impossible circumstances, who'd faced down her abuser with nothing but courage and desperation, who deserved a chance at freedom. I agree, he said. Partners. Equals. You watch my back, I'll watch yours. Tears spilled down Kayla's cheeks, but she was smiling. Partners, she echoed. I can live with that. The elder nodded approvingly. Then it's settled. The bond is recognized and recorded. You're free to go. They left Redstone Canyon as the sun touched the western rim, riding side by side back toward Wade's cabin. The journey that had been heavy with dread on the way there felt lighter now, almost peaceful. As the stars emerged and the canyon walls glowed in the last light, Kayla spoke quietly. Thank you, Wade, for everything. For catching the arrow, for facing the council, for giving me a choice instead of just making it for me. I don't have words for what that means.
Wade considered his response carefully. I think we both know you would have found a way out eventually, with or without me. You're too stubborn to be kept down permanently. Maybe, but you made it possible now, instead of years from now. She paused. What happens next? I meant what I said about watching your back, being partners, but I don't know what that looks like in practice. Neither do I, Wade admitted. I've been alone a long time, learning to be part of a team again. He shrugged. We'll figure it out as we go. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of leather and the soft thud of hooves on packed earth. Then Kayla asked, Will you teach me to shoot like you, to catch arrows? Wade laughed, the sound rusty from disuse but genuine. I caught 2 arrows in my entire life, both in the last 3 days, and I still don't know how I did it, but I can teach you to shoot straight if you want. I'd like that. When they reached the cabin, full dark had fallen. Wade tended the animals while Kayla lit the lamps inside. It felt strangely domestic, normal, like they'd been doing this for years instead of days. Later, sitting by the fire with cups of coffee warming their hands, Wade voiced something that had been nagging at him. You could still leave, you know. The council said we're bound, but out here no one's watching. You could take one of the mules, head west to a town where no one knows about the old laws. Start that new life you talked about. Kayla looked at him over her cup, her eyes reflecting the firelight. Is that what you want? For me to leave? I want you to choose freely. That's the whole point of what we did today. Then I choose to stay. She set down her cup. Not because of any bond or law or claim, but because I'm tired of running, tired of being alone, tired of looking over my shoulder. You offered me partnership, Wade, a place where I can heal and learn and figure out who I am when I'm not terrified all the time. That's worth more than any freedom I'd find in some distant town. Wade nodded slowly. Okay then, partners it is. But we need to set some ground rules. This is a one-room cabin, and we're virtual strangers. So, you take the bed, Kayla interrupted. It's your home, your furniture. I've been sleeping in caves and ditches for weeks. A blanket by the fire is luxury. We'll work out something more permanent later. Maybe build an addition to the cabin. I'd like to help with that, she smiled. I'm good with my hands. My father taught me carpentry before. Her smile faded. Before he sold me to Kyle. Wade wanted to say something comforting, but words felt inadequate. Instead, he stood and fetched his rifle from above the door. Here, he said, holding it out to her. This is yours now, along with ammunition, cleaning supplies, everything. A partner should be armed. Kayla took the rifle, her hands reverent as they traced the worn wood. Wade, I can't. This is too much. I've got another one. And a pistol. That rifle's a good one, accurate to 300 yards. It's yours. She looked up at him, and Wade saw tears threatening again. Why are you being so kind to me? Because someone should be. Simple words, but they carried the weight of his conviction. Because you deserve kindness. Because... He paused, searching for the right way to say it. Because maybe we're both looking for the same thing. A reason to stop running. A place to belong. Kayla stood, still holding the rifle, and for a moment Wade thought she might hug him. Instead, she extended her hand, formal and serious. Partners, she said firmly. Wade shook her hand. Partners. That night, Wade gave Kayla the bed despite her protests and settled into his rocking chair by the rebuilt fire. Sleep came easier than he expected, and his dreams were quieter than they'd been in years. He woke once, deep in the night, to find Kayla standing by the window, his rifle, her rifle now, held comfortably in her hands, keeping watch while he slept. Wade smiled and closed his eyes again. Maybe, he thought, this partnership thing might actually work. Outside, the canyon country stretched away into darkness, beautiful and brutal and entirely unconcerned with human troubles. But inside the small cabin, 2 broken souls had found something unexpected. Not romance, not salvation, but the simple, powerful hope that comes from no longer facing the world alone. The first day of their partnership began with coffee and awkward conversation, but by midday they'd settled into an easy rhythm, Wade checking the perimeter while Kayla tended the fire, then switching tasks without discussion. They worked well together, Wade noticed. Kayla was quick and capable, learning fast, asking questions only when necessary.
Over the next few days, they began to build something neither of them had words for yet. Not a family, it was too soon for that, too fragile. But a team, a unit, two people learning to trust each other in small increments, building a foundation one stone at a time. Wade taught Kayla to shoot, and she proved to have a natural eye for it. She taught him how to make bread from scratch, something Sarah used to do that he'd long forgotten. They worked on expanding the cabin, adding a small sleeping loft that would give them both privacy, and slowly, carefully, they began to share their stories. Not all at once, that would have been too much, but in fragments, late at night by the fire or during long afternoons working side by side. Wade learned that Kayla's mother had died when she was young, that her father had never recovered from the loss, that she'd essentially raised herself in a community that viewed women as commodities. She learned that Wade had been a sheriff back east, that he'd failed to save his family from cholera because he'd been too busy keeping the town safe, that he'd ridden west to escape the guilt and never forgave himself. "It wasn't your fault," Kayla said one night after Wade finished the story. "Tell that to the man I was 10 years ago. I'm telling it to the man you are now." She met his eyes. "You saved me, Wade. Not because you had to, but because you chose to. That counts for something." Wade didn't answer, but her words settled into a place in his chest he'd thought was dead, and they stayed there, warm and persistent, like a coal that refused to go out. 3 weeks after Redstone Canyon, riders appeared on the horizon again. Wade and Kayla saw them coming from a mile away and armed themselves, ready for trouble. But these weren't Kael's men. They were settlers from the territories, a man and woman with 3 children traveling west to unclaimed land. "Heard about you two," the man said, after they'd been invited inside for coffee. "Heard about the arrow and the council and how you stood up to Kael Thorne and his old ways. Gave us hope, that maybe things are changing out here, that maybe the future doesn't have to look like the past." After they left, Kayla stood in the doorway, watching them ride away. "Did we do that?" she asked quietly. "Give people hope?" "Looks like it. I never thought... When I shot that arrow, I was just trying to survive. I never imagined it would mean anything to anyone else." Wade joined her in the doorway, looking out at the canyon country he'd called home for so long. "Maybe that's how change happens. Not with grand plans, but with desperate people making brave choices and living through them." Kayla looked up at him, and Wade saw something shift in her expression. Something that might have been the beginning of affection, or respect, or maybe just recognition that they'd both survived something impossible together and come out the other side stronger for it. "Wade? Yeah?" "I'm glad I missed." He understood what she meant. If her arrow had hit him that day at sunset, if he'd died on that trail, she'd probably be back with Kael now. Or dead. And he'd be just another forgotten body in an unmarked grave. "I'm glad I caught it," he said. As the sun set over the canyon one more time, painting the rocks in shades of fire and gold, Wade Carter and Kayla Voss stood together in the doorway of a small cabin, 2 partners bound not by ancient law or desperate circumstance, but by the simple choice to stand together against a world that wanted to break them apart. The future was uncertain. Kael was still out there, still angry, still powerful. The old ways wouldn't die easily, and there would be more challenges, more confrontations, more hard choices ahead. But for now, in this moment, they had each other. They had this small piece of land, this rough cabin, this fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, they could build something better than what they'd left behind. And somehow, impossibly, that felt like enough. The weeks that followed the council meeting settled into a rhythm neither Wade nor Kayla had anticipated. The cabin that had once been a monument to solitude became something else entirely, a place where 2 damaged people learned to exist in the same space without destroying each other. It wasn't easy. Some mornings, Wade woke to find Kayla already outside, practicing with the rifle until her hands bled, pushing herself with a ferocity that spoke of demons he couldn't see. Other times, he'd catch her staring out the window for hours, her face blank, lost in memories she never shared. But there were good moments, too. The first time Kayla laughed, really laughed, not the bitter sound that passed for humor in the early days, Wade felt something crack open in his chest. It happened when one of his mules decided to chase a jackrabbit and got its lead rope tangled in a mesquite bush, braying indignantly while Wade tried to free it. Kayla's laughter rang out across the canyon, bright and unexpected as a desert bloom after rain. "You should see your face," she gasped, doubled over. "You look like you're negotiating with royalty instead of arguing with a mule." Wade couldn't help but grin. This mule's got more attitude than most royalty I've heard about. The loft was finished on a Tuesday, built from rough-cut timber Wade had stockpiled over the years. It wasn't fancy, just a platform accessible by a sturdy ladder, with enough headroom to sit up but not stand, insulated with packed grass and covered with one of Wade's spare blankets. But it was Kayla's space, her first true privacy in months, maybe years. She climbed up that first night and didn't come down until morning. When she did, her eyes were red but clearer than Wade had seen them. "Thank you," she said simply. "It's just a loft. It's mine. That's everything." A month after Redstone Canyon, the first real test came. Wade was checking his trapline in the high country when he heard the gunshot. Single crack, pistol by the sound, coming from the direction of the cabin. His heart seized. He abandoned the traps and ran, his boots pounding the rocky trail, his breath coming in harsh gasps. He burst into the clearing with his rifle raised, expecting to find Kyl's men, or worse. Instead, he found Kayla standing in the dooryard, her pistol still smoking and a dead rattlesnake at her feet. 6 feet if it's an inch, she said calmly, though her hand trembled slightly as she holstered the weapon. "Came out of the woodpile when I was gathering kindling. Didn't give me much choice." Wade lowered his rifle, his pulse still hammering. "You okay?" "Better than the snake." She looked at him, and something passed between them, recognition that she'd handled the threat herself, that she didn't need saving every time danger appeared. "I yelled first, like you taught me. Gave it a chance to leave. It chose to strike instead." "Good shooting." Wade examined the snake, clean headshot from about 10 feet. "You kept your cool." "Had a good teacher." She picked up the snake by the tail. "Waste not, want not, right? This'll make decent eating if we skin it proper." They spent the afternoon preparing the rattlesnake, Wade showing Kayla how to skin and gut it without damaging the meat. Their hands worked side by side, comfortable now with proximity that would have been awkward weeks earlier. "My father used to say that killing something meant you had to honor it," Kayla said quietly, her knife moving with practiced precision. "Use everything, waste nothing. Remember that a life was taken so you could live." She paused. "I wonder if he ever applied that thinking to daughters." Wade glanced at her, but she'd already moved on, her face carefully neutral. He was learning to recognize these moments, the times when old pain surfaced like that snake from the woodpile, dangerous and unexpected. "Your father made a bad choice," Wade said. "But you don't have to carry his mistakes forever." "Don't I? They shaped me, made me who I am." "Maybe, but you get to decide who you become next. That's the freedom part." Kayla's hand stilled. "Is that what you did? Decided who to become after losing your family?" "Tried to. Mostly I just ran from who I was before." Wade set aside his portion of the meat. "But maybe running isn't the worst thing. Sometimes you need distance before you can see clearly." "And can you see clearly now?" Wade considered the question honestly. Could he see clearly? His life had been nothing but gray fog for a decade, each day bleeding into the next with no purpose beyond survival. Then Kayla had arrived with her impossible arrow, and suddenly everything had color again. Not happy colors necessarily, but vivid ones. Danger and hope and fear and possibility all mixed together in ways that made him feel alive for the first time since Sarah and Emma died. "Getting there," he said finally, "still working on it." They cooked the snake that night over an open fire outside, the way Wade's old trapper friend had taught him. Kayla proved to be a quick study with camp cooking, seasoning the meat with wild herbs she'd gathered from the canyon. "You know," she said, watching the flames, "when I was with Kyle, I never cooked. Women in his compound weren't allowed near the kitchen. He had servants for that. Said it wasn't proper for his claimed women to do servants' work." Her voice dripped contempt, like being decorative property was somehow more dignified than being useful. "You're free to be as useful or decorative as you want now." "I choose useful." She turned the meat. "Being needed for what you can do instead of what you look like, that's real value." The snake was surprisingly good, tender, and mild. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that comes when two people don't feel obligated to fill every moment with words. Later, as they cleaned up, Kayla asked, "Do you think they'll come back? Kael's men?" "Eventually, probably. Men like Kael don't let go of grudges easily." "What do we do when they come?" Wade checked the loads in his rifle, more from habit than necessity. "We handle it. Together. That's what partners do." "Together," Kayla echoed, and Wade heard something in her voice, not fear exactly, but awareness. She was starting to believe it, he realized, starting to trust that she wouldn't face the next threat alone. The second test came 2 weeks later, and it didn't involve Kael at all. Wade had ridden to the distant trading post for supplies, leaving Kayla alone for the first time since Redstone Canyon. She'd insisted she'd be fine, and he'd reluctantly agreed, making the day-and-a-half journey to replenish their dwindling stores of flour, coffee, and ammunition. He returned to find a stranger's horse tied to his porch rail. Every instinct screamed danger. Wade dismounted quietly, circling wide to approach from an angle that gave him a clear view through the window. What he saw made his blood run cold. A man sat at Wade's table, helping himself to Wade's whiskey. He was young, maybe 30, with the hard eyes and easy violence of a career outlaw. His gun belt hung heavy with 2 pistols, and a rifle leaned against the wall within arm's reach. Kayla stood near the stove, her back straight, her face carefully blank. She was serving the stranger food, moving with precise, controlled motions that Wade recognized instantly. She was terrified, hiding it behind a mask of calm. Wade eased the cabin door open, his rifle centered on the stranger's spine. "That's my whiskey you're drinking." The man didn't even flinch. "And that's your woman serving it. You must be Carter. Heard about you." "Heard what?" "That you're the fool who caught an arrow and used it to embarrass Cale Thorne in front of the whole territory." The stranger took another drink. "Name's Jericho Ash. I ride with Kael sometimes. Other times I ride alone. Depends on the pay." Wade's finger tensed on the trigger. "You're in my home without invitation, drinking my liquor, and frightening my partner. Give me one reason I shouldn't shoot you where you sit. Because I'm not here for trouble." Jericho finally turned to face him, and Wade saw something unexpected in those hard eyes. Respect, maybe, or professional courtesy. "I'm here with information. Call it a warning from someone who doesn't fully agree with the old ways, but also doesn't want to see decent folks get killed for defying them." "I'm listening," Jericho gestured to the chair across from him. "Might want to sit. This'll take a minute." Wade didn't lower his rifle, but he did move closer, positioning himself where he could see both Jericho and Kayla. She caught his eye and gave the slightest shake of her head. "I'm okay," it said. He let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "Kael's planning something," Jericho said. "The council ruling stuck in his craw like a chicken bone. He's been riding the territories, talking to the old families, the ones who still remember when women were traded like cattle, and nobody questioned it. He's building support." Support for what? For challenging the council's authority, for calling a gathering of the old families and overturning the decision. He's saying the council elder was soft, that he let modern thinking corrupt the ancient ways. Jericho poured himself another drink, this time offering the bottle to Wade, who declined. "There's going to be a reckoning, Carter. Maybe not this month or next, but it's coming. And when it does, you and the girl are going to be right in the center of it." Kayla moved from the stove, no longer playing the submissive host. "Why are you telling us this? If you ride with Kael..." "I said I ride with him sometimes. Doesn't mean I agree with him." Jericho's eyes flicked to her, then away. "I had a sister once. Pretty thing. Smart, too. Old family traded her to a rancher twice her age when she was 16. She lasted 3 years before she hung herself from a barn rafter." His voice stayed flat, emotionless, but his knuckles whitened around the glass. "So yeah, I ride with Kael when the money's good, but I don't have to like what he stands for." The cabin fell silent except for the crackle of the fire. Wade studied Jericho, trying to read the truth behind the man's words. Outlaws lied as easily as breathing, but the pain in Jericho's voice when he mentioned his sister, that felt real. "What do you want from us?" Wade asked finally. "Nothing. Consider it a debt paid for my sister, for the life she should have had." Jericho stood, reaching slowly for his rifle. "But if you're smart, you'll prepare. Kael's got maybe 20 men who'll ride with him when he makes his move. And he will make a move. It's just a matter of when. A 20 against 2, Kayla said quietly. Those aren't good odds. No, they're not. Jericho settled his hat on his head. But I've seen you shoot, Carter. Saw it myself at Redstone. Man who can catch arrows might just be able to beat odds like that. Might. He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the frame. One more thing. Kael's not just angry about losing the girl. He's angry because you made him look weak in front of the whole territory. You challenged his authority, his interpretation of the law, his whole world view. Men like that, they don't forgive. They don't forget. And they sure as hell don't quit. Then he was gone, mounting his horse and riding into the gathering dusk without looking back. Wade and Kayla stood in the doorway, watching until horse and rider disappeared into the canyon shadows. Finally, Kayla spoke. Do you believe him? About the warning? Yeah. About his motives? Wade shrugged. Maybe. Doesn't really matter. The information's good either way. 20 men, Wade. Even if we see them coming, even if we're ready, we'll figure it out. He closed the door, checked the bolt. That's a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, tell me what happened. How'd he get in? Kayla moved to the table, poured herself a small measure of whiskey, and downed it in one swallow. Her hand shook slightly when she set the glass down. He knocked. Actually knocked, polite as you please. Said he was passing through and smelled coffee. I opened the door thinking it was someone from the settlements, maybe bringing news. She laughed bitterly. Stupid. You taught me better than that. You're not stupid. You made a judgment call based on incomplete information. We all do it. He could have killed me, taken me, done whatever he wanted, and I just opened the door and invited him in like some naive... Wade crossed the room and gripped her shoulders, not hard but firm enough to break through the spiral of self-recrimination he could see building. Stop. He didn't kill you, didn't take you, didn't hurt you. You handled it, kept your head, stayed alive until I got back. That's what matters. Kayla looked up at him, and Wade saw tears threatening. I was so scared, Wade. Not just of him, but of what it meant. That I'm still vulnerable, still weak, still the same frightened girl who let herself be taken. You're not weak. Weak people don't escape from fortified compounds. Weak people don't survive arrow wounds and infection in the wilderness. Weak people don't stand up to territorial councils and challenge ancient laws. He released her shoulders but held her gaze. You were scared. That's not weakness. That's sanity. Being brave doesn't mean not feeling fear. It means feeling it and functioning anyway. And that's exactly what you did. She wiped her eyes roughly. When did you become so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just old and stubborn, and I've made enough mistakes to recognize strength when I see it. They spent the evening reinforcing the cabin's defenses. Wade had never been much for fortification. In 15 years of isolation, he'd never needed it. But Jericho's warning changed the equation. They moved furniture to create better firing positions, stocked weapons at strategic points, even rigged a simple alarm system using tin cans and wire around the perimeter. My father used to say that preparation was prayer and action, Kayla said, stringing wire between two posts. That taking care of business was how you showed faith in tomorrow. Smart man, for someone who made such a terrible choice. People are complicated. She tested the wire's tension. He wasn't evil, Wade, just weak. And when weak men get scared, they make deals with stronger men to protect themselves. He traded me to Kael because he thought it would keep him safe, give him security, cement an alliance. Her voice went hard. Didn't work. Kael took over his land anyway, 6 months after I ran. Last I heard, my father was working as a hired hand on property that used to be his. You heard from him? No, just heard. News travels, even in the territories. She moved to the next section of wire. Part of me wants to feel sorry for him, but mostly I just feel nothing. He made his choice. I made mine. Now we both live with the consequences. Wade understood that kind of numbness, the protective shell that forms around old wounds. He'd carried it for years, using isolation as insulation against caring too much about anything. But lately, working beside Kayla, he felt the shell developing cracks. Not breaking, not yet, but definitely fracturing. That night, lying in his bed while Kayla settled into her loft, Wade stared at the ceiling and thought about 20 armed men riding to enforce ancient laws. The smart play would be to run, head west to California or north to Oregon, leave the territories behind entirely. He had enough saved to start over somewhere new, and Kayla was strong enough now to travel. But running felt like losing. Like admitting that men like Kyle got to decide how the world worked, who had rights, and who didn't, which traditions survived, and which died. Wade had spent 15 years running from his past. He was tired of it, tired of letting fear dictate his choices. Besides, something had changed in him since catching that arrow. Purpose, maybe. Or just the simple fact that he'd found something worth fighting for besides his own survival. Not Kayla specifically, she wasn't his to protect or possess, but the principle she represented. The idea that people deserve to choose their own paths, own their own lives, be free from the chains of tradition that served only to keep the powerful in power. Wade? Kayla's voice drifted down from the loft. You awake? Yeah. If we run, if we leave the territories entirely, would that be enough? Would Kyle let us go? Wade considered lying, offering false hope, but Kayla deserved the truth. No. Men like Kyle don't operate on logic. It's about pride now, about saving face. He'd hunt us for years if he had to. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the whisper of wind through the canyon and the settling sounds of the cabin. Then we stay, Kayla said finally. We prepare, we plan, and we face whatever comes. Together. Together, Wade agreed. The following weeks took on new urgency. Wade taught Kayla everything he knew about survival, fighting, and frontier justice. She was a quick study, soaking up information like desert sand absorbing rare rain. They practiced shooting until both could hit a target at 300 yards in any light. They drilled defensive positions, escape routes, hand signals for silent communication. But they also lived, tended the garden Kayla had started, hunted together, bringing down a deer that kept them in meat for 2 weeks, sat by the fire in the evenings trading stories and slowly, carefully, building something neither of them had quite named yet. One night, about 6 weeks after Jericho's visit, Kayla climbed down from her loft earlier than usual. Wade looked up from the harness he was mending. Can't sleep? Don't want to. She settled into the chair across from him. Wade, I need to tell you something about what happened with Kyle, about the 3 months before I escaped. Wade set aside the harness. You don't owe me your story. I know, but I want to tell it. Need to, maybe. She twisted her hands in her lap. I've been carrying it alone for so long, and it's eating me from the inside. If we're partners, if we're going to face what's coming, you should know what you're fighting for, who you're fighting for. Okay, Wade said quietly. I'm listening. And so Kayla told him. Not everything. Some wounds were too deep for words, but enough. She told him about the compound where Kyle kept his claimed women, 5 of them in total, each one broken in different ways. She told him about the rules, the punishments, the systematic destruction of anything resembling independence or hope. She told him about the other women who'd tried to escape and what had happened to them. Wade listened without interrupting, his hands clenched into fists, his jaw tight. Rage built in his chest, hot and fierce, at the casual cruelty she described. But beneath the rage was something colder and more dangerous, determination, the kind that didn't burn out quickly but instead settled into bone-deep resolve. The woman who helped me escape, Kayla said, her voice barely a whisper now. Her name was Mara. She was Kyle's first claim, taken 20 years ago when she was just 16. She'd stopped fighting long before I arrived, just existed like a ghost. But when she saw me planning to run, something woke up in her. She created the distraction that let me get to the horses. Screamed that there was a fire in the south building. Every guard ran to check, and I slipped out through the chaos. Did she get out too? Kayla's face crumpled. No, Kyle figured out what she'd done. She couldn't finish, but Wade understood. Some stories didn't need words. I'm sorry, he said, knowing it was inadequate. She died so I could live. Gave me a chance at freedom when she'd lost all hope of finding her own. Kayla wiped her eyes. That's why I can't run, Wade. Not from KL, not from this fight. Mara died believing that at least one of us would escape, would survive, would be free. If I spend the rest of my life running and hiding, then she died for nothing. Wade reached across the space between them and took her hand. It was the first time they'd touched beyond necessity since the night he'd cleaned her wound. Then we don't run, he said. We stand. And when Kyle comes, we make sure he understands that the old ways are dead, and men who cling to them die with them. Kayla squeezed his hand, and Wade felt the tremor run through her. Not fear this time, but relief. The relief of finally sharing a burden too heavy to carry alone. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For listening. For not trying to fix it, or minimize it, or tell me it wasn't that bad. For just being here. They sat like that for a long time, hands clasped across the space between chairs, two damaged people finding strength in shared silence. Eventually, Kayla climbed back to her loft, but something had shifted. A wall had come down, and in its place was something stronger than stone, trust built on truth instead of necessity. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Wade heard them coming from a mile out. Not the aggressive thunder of raiders, but the slower, more deliberate pace of families traveling together. He and Kayla took defensive positions anyway, rifles ready, until the group came into view. 3 wagons, maybe a dozen people total, the same family that had stopped weeks ago, plus 2 others. They pulled up in the dooryard, and the lead man dismounted with his hands clearly visible. Mr. Carter, Miss Voss, hope we're not intruding. Wade lowered his rifle, but didn't holster it. Depends on why you're here. To talk, to ask advice. The man gestured to the others. You two stood up to Cale Thorne and the old ways and lived to tell about it. That gives folks like us hope. But hope without a plan is just a good way to die. We need to know, is it possible? Can people actually break free of the old families and their laws and build something better? Kayla emerged from the cabin, her rifle held casually, but ready. Wade saw her take in the group. The women standing beside their men instead of behind them, the children watching with curious eyes, the general air of determined uncertainty. Come inside, Wade said, making a decision. All of you. Let's talk. They crowded into the small cabin, spilling onto the porch, children sitting on the floor, while adults leaned against walls. Wade and Kayla stood near the fireplace, and for a moment Wade felt like he was back in his sheriff's office. Except this time he was breaking laws instead of enforcing them. First thing you need to understand, Wade began, is that standing up to the old ways means accepting risk. Cale won't let challenges go unanswered. Neither will the other old families. You could lose everything. We've already lost everything that matters, one of the women said quietly. Our daughter ran away last year rather than accept the match her grandfather arranged. We haven't heard from her since. Don't even know if she's alive. Her voice cracked. I won't lose another child to traditions that value property over people. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. These weren't radicals or troublemakers, Wade realized. They were desperate parents and young couples, people who'd seen the old ways destroy too many lives and finally decided enough was enough. Second thing, Kayla said, her voice steady and clear, is that you can't do this halfway. If you challenge the old families, you have to be ready to defend that choice with everything you have. They'll come for you, try to make examples, use fear to keep others in line. How do we defend ourselves? A young man asked. Most of us aren't fighters. We're farmers, craftsmen, regular people. Regular people can learn to fight, Wade said. Can learn to shoot, to work together, to turn homes into defensible positions. It's not complicated, just takes practice and will. They spent hours talking, planning, sharing information. Wade learned that the dissatisfaction with the old ways ran deeper than he'd realized. Dozens of families across the territories were quietly questioning traditions they'd never dared challenge before. Kayla and Wade's stand at Redstone Canyon had become something of a legend, proof that resistance was possible. By the time the families left that afternoon, Wade had agreed to things he never imagined he would. Training sessions for anyone who wanted to learn defensive shooting, a network of safe houses for people fleeing the old families, even a rough system of communication using trusted riders to spread warnings when trouble was brewing. We're building a resistance, Kayla said softly, watching the wagons disappear into the distance. Against our own people, our own territory. Not against them, against the system that's been crushing them for generations. Wade turned to her.
You okay with this? With what we're becoming? Kayla smiled and it reached her eyes. I'm terrified and excited in equal measure. But yeah, I'm okay with it. Better than okay.
For the first time since Mara died, I feel like her sacrifice might actually mean something. Like maybe one person's courage really can change things. Two people's courage, Wade corrected. You're the one who had the guts to run in the first place. I just happened to be in the right place with quick reflexes. Don't sell yourself short. You could have turned me over to Kael, collected a reward, gone back to your quiet life. Instead, you caught an impossible arrow and declared war on the old ways. She touched his arm lightly. That's not luck, Wade. That's choice. Over the following weeks, a steady trickle of visitors appeared at the cabin. Some came for training. Others brought information about Kael's movements, the old family's reactions, the shifting political landscape of the territories. Wade's isolated canyon became an unlikely hub of quiet revolution. Kayla thrived in ways Wade hadn't anticipated. She worked with the women especially, teaching them not just how to shoot, but how to think tactically, how to plan escape routes, how to hide weapons and supplies. She shared her story, the parts she could bear to tell, and in doing so gave others permission to voice their own experiences of the old ways' brutality. You're good at this, Wade told her one evening after a particularly large group had departed. Teaching, organizing, inspiring people, natural leader. Kayla looked surprised. I don't feel like a leader. Half the time I'm making it up as I go. That's what leadership is. Nobody really knows what they're doing. They just act confident and hope it works out. Is that what you did when you were sheriff? Wade thought back to those years, to the weight of the badge and the responsibility that came with it. Pretty much. Tried to do right by people, keep them safe, enforce laws that made sense and quietly ignore the ones that didn't. Failed more than I succeeded, but I kept trying. You're doing it again now, keeping people safe, enforcing justice, fighting for what's right instead of what's traditional. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just a stubborn old fool who can't let things alone. You're not old, Kayla said, then grinned. Stubborn, definitely. Fool? Jury's still out. They laughed together, easy and natural, and Wade marveled at how far they'd come. 2 months ago, they'd been strangers bound by impossible circumstances. Now they were partners in the truest sense, building something neither of them fully understood, but both believed in. The storm finally broke on a Tuesday morning in late autumn. Wade was teaching a group of young men basic marksmanship when Jericho Ash rode hard into the canyon, his horse lathered and blowing. They're coming, he gasped, swinging down from the saddle. Kael and maybe 30 men plus supporters from 3 old families. They'll be here by nightfall. Wade felt his stomach drop. 30 armed men. He'd prepared for 20, maybe 25. But 30, with family support, meant this wasn't just a raid. It was a war party. Why'd you warn us? Kayla demanded, her hand on her pistol. Last time you said you rode with Kael sometimes? Last time I hadn't watched what you two started spread across the territories like wildfire. Jericho met her eyes. The old families are scared, Voss. Really scared. You've given people hope, shown them resistance is possible. Kael's not coming just to reclaim you anymore. He's coming to make an example, to crush this rebellion before it spreads further. Wade's mind raced, calculating numbers and odds. The canyon was defensible, but not against those numbers. Even with every able-bodied person in the network, they'd be outnumbered. We need to evacuate, he said. Get everyone who's here to safety then. Then what? One of the young men interrupted. Run? Let them destroy everything we've built? All the families who've put their trust in us. What do we tell them? Sorry, we gave up? I'm telling you to survive, Wade snapped. Dead people can't fight for anything. My father used to say that some things are worth dying for, the young man shot back. I think this might be one of them. Wade opened his mouth to argue, then stopped, because he saw it in their faces, all of them, the settlers, the young couples, even the older folks who'd come seeking hope. They weren't running. They'd reached the point where standing and fighting mattered more than survival. He looked at Kayla. She met his gaze steadily, and he read her answer there before she spoke. We stay, she said simply. We've been preparing for this. Time to see if it was enough. Wade wanted to argue, to force reason on them, to make them see that courage without strategy was just suicide. But he also recognized the look in their eyes. He'd seen it in his own mirror back east, the day he'd strapped on his sheriff's badge knowing the outlaw he was facing would probably kill him. Some fights you took not because you could win, but because not fighting would kill something more important than your body. It would kill your soul. All right, he said heavily. Then we prepare. We've got maybe 8 hours before they arrive. Let's make them count. The canyon transformed in those 8 hours from a quiet homestead into a fortress. Wade divided the defenders into teams, assigning positions based on skill and temperament. The cabin became the central strong point, its walls reinforced with stacked stones and spare timber. Kayla organized the women and older children into supply lines, ensuring ammunition, water, and medical supplies were distributed to every position. We're not trying to win a pitched battle, Wade told the assembled group as the sun climbed toward noon. We're trying to survive long enough that Kyle realizes the cost of taking us is higher than his pride can afford. Make every shot count. Don't waste ammunition on poor targets. And for heaven's sake, keep your heads down between volleys. Jericho moved among them, offering tactical advice with the casual competence of a man who'd survived more fights than he could count. Kale's going to try to flank you through the North Ravine, he said, sketching in the dirt with a stick. It's the obvious approach. Put your best shots there with clear fields of fire. Make him pay for every yard. You're not staying to fight with us? One of the young men asked. Jericho's smile was hard and humorless. I'm a mercenary, kid. I don't fight for free, and I sure as hell don't fight against my own interests. But I'll do this much. I'll ride to the settlements. Spread word about what's happening here. Maybe shame some folks into action. Maybe bring reinforcements. He swung into his saddle. Or maybe I'll just keep riding, and you'll never see me again. Either way, good luck. You're going to need it. He rode out without looking back, leaving Wade to wonder if the warning had been genuine compassion or just Jericho's way of hedging his bets. Didn't matter now. What mattered was the 30 armed men who'd be here in hours, and the 23 defenders, men, women, and a handful of boys barely old enough to shave, who'd chosen to stand against them. Kayla found Wade on the cabin's roof, where he was positioning riflemen with clear sight lines down the main approach. She climbed up beside him, moving with the confidence that came from weeks of practice and growing strength. The children are in the root cellar with 2 of the older women, she reported. If things go badly, they have supplies to last 3 days and instructions to stay hidden no matter what they hear. Wade nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The thought of children huddled in darkness while violence raged above them brought back memories he'd spent years trying to bury. Emma's small hand in his, Sarah's voice singing lullabies, the helpless rage of watching them die while he could do nothing. Hey! Kayla's hand on his arm pulled him back to the present. Where'd you go just then? Nowhere good. Wade forced himself to focus. You should be with the children. You're the best shot we have after me, but you're also the reason Kyle's coming. If we can't hold them and you're captured, then I'll put a bullet in my own head before I let him take me alive. Her voice was flat, matter-of-fact. But I'm not hiding while other people fight my battle. We're partners, remember? That means we stand together or not at all. Wade wanted to argue, to insist she prioritize survival over pride. But he saw the steel in her eyes and recognized it for what it was. The same determination that had driven her to escape Kyle's compound, to survive weeks in the wilderness with an infected wound, to stand before the Territorial Council and demand her freedom. Kayla Voss wasn't going to hide, and trying to force her would only damage the trust they'd built. North Ravine, then, he said finally. That's where they'll hit hardest. I'll need you there. North Ravine, she agreed. They spent the next hour making final preparations. Ammunition was distributed and redistributed until every defender had at least 50 rounds. Water barrels were positioned at strategic points. Escape routes were marked and rehearsed. Wade walked among the defenders, offering quiet words of encouragement, checking weapons, making sure everyone understood their role. A young woman named Sarah, not his Sarah, but the name still caught in his throat, approached him with trembling hands. Mr. Carter, I've never shot at a person before. I don't know if I can. Wade took her hands in his, steadying them. You can. When the moment comes and it's between you and them, your body will know what to do. Just remember, they're coming to destroy everything you've built, everything you believe in. They want to drag you back to a world where you're property instead of people. You have every right to defend yourself against that. What if I kill someone? Then you'll carry it. Like I carry the men I've killed, like every person here who's had to make that choice. But carrying the weight of necessary violence is better than being crushed under the weight of submission. You'll survive it, I promise. The sun reached its apex and began its slow descent toward the western rim. Still no sign of Kyle force, but Wade could feel them out there, approaching with the inevitability of a storm front. The defenders settled into their positions, weapons ready, nerves stretched tight. Kayla checked and rechecked her rifle. The one Wade had given her that first night, now as familiar in her hands as her own heartbeat. She'd positioned herself in the North Ravine with 5 others, all good shots, all determined to hold the line. "You ever think about what happens after?" asked Marcus, a farmer's son who'd proven surprisingly adept with a rifle. "If we survive this, I mean. Do we just keep fighting? Is this our lives now, always looking over our shoulders?" "Maybe," Kayla said, her eyes scanning the approaches. "Or maybe this is the fight that changes everything. Maybe if we hurt them badly enough here, the old families will realize the cost of maintaining the old ways is too high. Maybe this is where the future starts."
That's a lot of maybes. It's all we've got. Wade watched from his position near the cabin as the shadows lengthened and the light turned golden. Beautiful country, he thought. Worth fighting for. Worth dying for, if it came to that. He'd spent 15 years here trying to forget he was alive, trying to exist without feeling. Now, with death potentially minutes away, he'd never felt more present, more real. They came with the sunset.
Wade spotted them first, a line of riders silhouetted against the dying light, at least 30 strong, like Jericho had warned. They approached slowly, confidently, men who expected resistance but didn't fear it. Kyle rode at the front, his iron-gray hair catching the last rays of sun, his posture radiating the absolute certainty of someone who'd never truly been challenged. The riders stopped just outside rifle range. Kale dismounted, walked forward alone until he stood maybe 200 yards from the cabin. His voice carried clearly in the still evening air. "Wade Carter, I'm here under the authority of the old families to restore order and tradition. You've harbored a fugitive, corrupted the council's ruling, and spread dissent across the territories. Surrender Kayla Voss and yourself for judgment, and the others will be spared." Wade stepped out from behind his barricade, his rifle held loosely but ready. "Kayla Voss is free under council law. The bond was acknowledged and accepted on terms of partnership, not ownership. You have no authority here, Kyle. Ride away while you still can." Kyle's laugh was harsh. "Council law? The council is 6 old men trying to hold on to power by abandoning the traditions that built this territory. The old families reject their authority. We've come to restore what you've tried to destroy." "You've come to enforce slavery," Kayla's voice rang out from the North Ravine. "Call it tradition. Call it the old ways. Call it whatever makes you sleep at night. But we both know what it really is. Men with power refusing to give it up, even when that power is built on the backs of broken women." Kayle's face darkened. "Kayla, girl, I've been patient with you. More patient than you deserve after the trouble you've caused, the good man you killed. But my patience has limits. Come out now, accept your proper place, and I'll see you're treated well. Refuse, and when we take you, and we will take you, you'll wish you'd died in that canyon the day you ran." "I'd rather die free than live as your property," Kayla shouted back, "and you'll have to kill everyone here before you take me. Are you prepared for that, Kyle? Are you ready to massacre families, murder children, burn down everything just to prove your traditions matter more than human lives?" The riders behind Kyle shifted uneasily. Wade saw the calculation in their faces. Some were true believers in the old ways, but others were just hired guns or family men who'd been told this would be a simple enforcement action. Mass murder was something else entirely. Kale must have sensed the wavering because his voice turned harder, more commanding. "Last chance, Carter. Surrender, or we come in shooting. Blood will be on your hands." Wade raised his rifle, sighting down the barrel at Kale's chest. "The blood's already on your hands. Has been for years. Every woman you've claimed, every family you've destroyed, every person who died rather than submit, that's your legacy. Today it ends." For a long moment, silence hung over the canyon. Then Kale turned and walked back to his men, mounted his horse, and raised his hand. "Take them," he ordered. The assault began with a volley of rifle fire that tore chunks from the cabin's walls and sent defenders diving for cover. Wade returned fire, his first shot taking down a rider who'd gotten too aggressive with his advance. The man tumbled from his saddle, and suddenly the fight was real, bullets flying in both directions, the air filling with gun smoke and shouting. Kael's men split into 3 groups, exactly as Jericho had predicted. The main force drove straight at the cabin, providing covering fire while a smaller group attempted to flank through the north ravine. The third group circled wide, trying to approach from the southeast where the terrain offered some cover. "North ravine," Wade shouted, though Kayla and her team had already opened fire. The distinctive crack of a rifle punctuated the chaos, and Wade saw another of Kael's men fall, clutching his leg. The next hour blurred into nightmare. Wade moved between positions, directing fire, dragging wounded defenders to safety, making every shot count. The cabin's reinforcements held against the initial assault, but bullets chewed through the timber and splinters filled the air like deadly rain. In the North Ravine, Kayla fought with the cold precision of someone who'd found her purpose. Each shot was deliberate, economical, and devastatingly effective. The attackers trying to flank through the ravine met withering fire that turned the narrow passage into a killing ground. Bodies piled up, and the assault through that approach faltered, then stopped entirely. But the southeast team was making progress. They'd found a dead angle the defenders had missed, a fold in the terrain that let them advance within 50 yards of the cabin. Wade spotted the danger and redirected 3 shooters to cover the gap, but it was too late. The attackers rushed the last distance, and suddenly there were men inside the defensive perimeter, fighting at close quarters. Wade dropped his rifle and drew his pistol, engaging the nearest attacker at 10 feet. The man went down, but 2 more rushed him. Wade fired twice more, then the pistol clicked empty, and he was grabbing for his knife, a blade that had skinned 1,000 rabbits but never tasted human blood. The first attacker swung a rifle stock at Wade's head. He ducked, felt the wind of its passage, and drove his knife up under the man's ribs. Hot blood spilled over his hands, and the man's eyes went wide with shock before he collapsed. The second attacker hesitated, just for a heartbeat, and in that hesitation, Wade pulled the dying man's pistol from its holster and shot him in the chest. Around him, the close-quarters fight raged. Defenders who'd never done violence beyond butchering livestock fought with the desperate ferocity of people protecting their families. A woman named Beth, a mother of 3 who'd come seeking freedom for her daughters, beat an attacker to death with a cast-iron skillet when his rifle jammed. Marcus, the farmer's son, took a bullet in the shoulder but kept fighting, using his rifle as a club when he ran out of ammunition. Kayla saw the breach from her position in the ravine and made a split-second decision. "Hold this line," she shouted to the others, then ran toward the cabin, her rifle ready. She arrived to find Wade surrounded by 3 attackers, bleeding from a cut across his forehead, his knife in one hand and an empty pistol in the other. She shot the first attacker before he even knew she was there. The second turned toward her, and she worked the rifle's lever action with practiced speed, putting a round through his throat. The third tried to use Wade as a shield, but Wade dropped and rolled, giving Kayla a clear shot that she took without hesitation. "You're hit," she said, breathing hard, checking Wade for injuries beyond the head wound. "Shallow. I'm fine." Wade reloaded his pistol with shaking hands. "The ravine. They're holding, but we can't sustain this. We've got maybe 10 defenders still able to fight, and Kael's still got 20 men at least." As if to punctuate her words, a fresh volley of gunfire erupted from Kael's position. The attackers were regrouping, preparing for another push. Wade looked around at his remaining defenders, exhausted, wounded, running low on ammunition, but still standing, still fighting. "We need to break their will," he said. "Make Kael realize this isn't worth it." "How? We're barely holding as it is." Wade's mind raced, trying to find an angle, some way to turn desperation into advantage. Then he saw it. Kael himself, directing his men from a position of relative safety about 150 yards out. In the gathering darkness, illuminated by the defender's fire, he made a clear target. A difficult shot, but not impossible for someone with Wade's skill. "Cover me," Wade said, moving to a position with a clear sightline. He took his rifle from where he'd dropped it, checked the load, and settled into a shooting stance. The distance was at the edge of his effective range, and the light was failing fast, but he'd made harder shots. Kayla understood immediately what he intended. "Wade, if you miss, then I miss, but if I don't take the shot, we're dead anyway in the next assault." He took a breath, let it out slowly, and sighted on Kael Thorne. The man was moving, gesturing to his riders, organizing the next attack. Wade tracked him, leading the target slightly, accounting for wind and distance and the adrenaline making his hands shake. The rifle kicked against his shoulder. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Kyle stumbled, clutched his side, and went down. The effect on his men was immediate and dramatic. Attackers who'd been preparing to charge instead rushed to their fallen leader. Shouting erupted, confusion spreading through their ranks. Wade worked the lever action and fired again, this time aiming into the cluster of men surrounding Kyle, driving them back, sowing more chaos. "Second wave!" Kayla shouted, and the remaining defenders opened fire in a coordinated volley that tore through the disorganized attackers. Men fell or scattered, seeking cover, all thoughts of assault abandoned in favor of survival. For several minutes, the battle hung in balance. Then one of Kyle's riders, a big man Wade recognized from Redstone Canyon, stood up in his stirrups and shouted, "Fall back! Everyone fall back to the rally point!" The attackers retreated in disorder, some carrying wounded comrades, others simply fleeing. Within 5 minutes, the canyon was empty except for the bodies of the fallen and the smoke drifting through the still air. Wade lowered his rifle, his hands finally starting to shake in earnest now that the immediate danger had passed. Around him, defenders emerged from cover, checking on each other, counting the cost. "Casualties?" Wade called out. The count was brutal. 4 dead, 7 wounded badly enough that they might not survive the night without proper medical care. Every defender bore injuries of some kind, even if just cuts and bruises. The cabin was a ruin, its walls shot through, one corner collapsed entirely. The canyon looked like a battlefield, which it was, but they'd held. Against 30 attackers, they'd held. Kayla climbed down from her position in the north ravine, her face smudged with powder smoke, blood on her hands from helping the wounded. She found Wade sitting on what remained of his porch, staring at the carnage. "Is he dead?" she asked quietly. "Kyle?" "Don't know. Hit him center mass, but from that distance I can't be sure how bad. His men got him out, so maybe he lives, maybe he doesn't. If he lives, he'll come back. Maybe. Or maybe this showed him the cost is too high." Wade looked up at her, and she saw exhaustion in every line of his face. "How many of theirs did we get?" "At least 8 dead, probably twice that wounded. We hurt them, Wade, hurt them bad." Wade stood slowly, his body protesting every movement. "Help me see to the wounded. Ours first. Then if any of theirs survived, we'll patch them up too. You want to help the men who just tried to kill us? I want to show them we're better than they are. That we can afford mercy because we're fighting for something they can't understand. The idea that people matter more than pride or tradition." They worked through the night, tending the wounded, burying the dead, shoring up defensive positions in case the attack resumed. But no renewed assault came. The canyon remained quiet except for the moans of injured men and the quiet sobbing of people processing what they'd just survived. Dawn broke cold and gray, revealing the full extent of the carnage. 10 of Kyle's men dead, scattered across the canyon floor. 4 defenders lost, including young Sarah, who'd asked Wade if she could kill. She'd died defending the position he'd assigned her, her rifle still clutched in her hands, her face peaceful despite the violence of her passing. Wade stood over her body, and for the first time since Sarah and Emma died, he let himself cry. Not just for this girl who'd never had a chance to become the woman she might have been, but for all of them. Every life cut short by the clash between progress and tradition. Every person's sacrifice to maintain a social order that served only those already in power. Kayla found him there and stood beside him in silence, her hand finding his. They didn't speak. Words would have been inadequate anyway. Around mid-morning, a single rider appeared on the canyon rim. Wade raised his rifle, but the rider held up a white flag, a piece of torn cloth tied to a stick. Slowly, carefully, the rider descended into the canyon. It was one of Kyle's men, a grizzled veteran Wade remembered seeing at Redstone Canyon. The man dismounted well outside rifle range and approached on foot, his hands clearly visible and empty. "I'm here to talk," he called out. "No tricks, no trap, just words." Wade stepped out to meet him, Kayla at his side despite his gesture for her to stay back. The rider looked at them both with eyes that had seen too much violence and found no glory in it. "Kyle's alive," the man said without preamble. "Barely. Your bullet punched through his side, missed the vitals but tore him up bad inside. He'll live, but he'll never ride the same, never fight the same. You broke him, Carter. Good, Wade said flatly. Maybe, maybe not. The writer spat into the dust. Thing is, Kael's not the only old family leader. There are others, and some of them are worse than he ever was. You made a statement yesterday showed that resistance is possible, but you also proved you're willing to kill for it. That's going to harden some hearts, make this fight uglier. It was already ugly, Kayla said. We just made it visible. The writer nodded. Fair point. I'm here because the old families are meeting tonight, deciding how to respond. Some want to wipe you out. Make an example so brutal that no one ever dares challenge tradition again. Others think yesterday proved the old ways are dying and fighting it is just throwing good lives after bad. Which side are you on? Wade asked. I'm on the side of going home to my wife and kids without any more bullet holes in me. The writer met Wade's eyes. I followed Kael for 10 years, believed in the old ways because that's how I was raised, how my father was raised. But yesterday, watching men die over whether a woman gets to choose her own life, that's when I realized maybe tradition isn't worth the blood price. He reached into his jacket slowly, pulling out a folded piece of paper. This is from the council elder, the one who presided at Redstone. He heard about the fight, and he's calling an emergency session. All the old families, all the settlements, everyone with a stake in how the territory's run. He wants you there, Carter. You and Kayla both. Wants you to tell your story, make your case, give people a chance to choose what kind of future they want. Wade took the paper, scanned it quickly. The meeting was set for 3 days hence, at Redstone Canyon again. A gathering of the territory's power brokers, where the fate of the old ways would be debated and possibly decided. What if we refuse? Kayla asked. Then the hardliners win by default, and you'll spend the rest of your short lives fighting ambushes and assassinations. The elder's giving you a chance to settle this with words instead of bullets. I'd take it if I were you. The writer turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. There were families in yesterday's fight. Young folks, old folks, people who'd never held a gun before last week. They fought like lions protecting their homes. That kind of courage, that kind of commitment, it scared the hell out of some of Kael's men, made them question whether they were on the right side. He looked back at them. Win or lose 3 days from now, you've already changed things. Just thought you should know. He rode away, leaving Wade and Kayla standing in the ruins of the canyon, holding a piece of paper that might represent their last chance at peace, or might just be an invitation to their own execution. What do you think? Kayla asked. Wade looked around at the defenders who'd survived the night, at the fresh graves being dug, at the children emerging from the root cellar to find their world transformed by violence. He thought about the choice facing them, keep fighting until one side was completely destroyed, or try to win with words what they'd failed to win with bullets. I think we've proven we can fight, he said finally. Now we need to prove we can do more than that. We need to show them a better way. And if they won't listen, then at least we tried. But Kayla, I'm tired of killing, tired of watching good people die for bad reasons. If there's even a chance we can end this without more bloodshed, I have to take it. Kayla was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant. Mara died believing I'd be free. The people who fell yesterday died believing we were building something better. If we go to this meeting and they kill us, or worse, force us back into the old ways, their deaths would be for nothing. Or maybe their deaths bought us the credibility to speak with authority. We're not just troublemakers now, we're people who fought for our beliefs and survived. That carries weight. She nodded slowly. 3 days. We use that time to prepare, not for fighting, but for talking. We figure out exactly what we want, what we're willing to compromise on, what will die before surrendering. And then we go to Redstone Canyon and we make them listen. Together? Always together, Kayla said, and there was something in her voice that made Wade look at her closely. What he saw there wasn't just partnership or friendship, but something deeper, something that had been growing in the spaces between bullets and bloodshed. Trust, certainly. Respect, absolutely. But also affection, the kind that comes from facing death beside someone and discovering they're exactly the person you hoped they'd be. He didn't have words for it, not yet. Maybe there weren't words. But standing there in the gray morning light, surrounded by the evidence of violence survived and prices paid, Wade Carter felt something he hadn't felt in 15 years. Hope. Not the vague, distant kind, but the immediate, visceral hope that comes from seeing a path forward, even if that path is dangerous and uncertain. 3 days, he said. Let's make them count. They spent those days preparing, not weapons this time, but words, arguments and counter-arguments, proposals for how the territories could transition away from the old ways without destroying the social fabric entirely. Kayla proved to have a sharp political mind, understanding instinctively how to frame their position in ways that address the old family's fears while still insisting on fundamental change. They're scared of chaos, she explained to Wade on the second night. They've built their whole lives around hierarchy and order. We can't just tear that down without offering something to replace it. We need to show them that respecting human dignity and maintaining social stability aren't mutually exclusive. You sound like a politician. Maybe I am. Maybe that's what I become after this. Someone who fights with words instead of bullets. Though I have to say, I prefer your way. Bullets are more straightforward. Wade smiled. Bullets only work until someone shoots back. Words, done right, can change minds. Can't change a mind with a corpse.
Wat zijn met dit?
Chai sheets. Survivors from the battle trickled back to the canyon over those 3 days, bringing supplies and support. News of the fight had spread across the territories faster than wildfire, carried by writers like Jericho who understood the significance of what had happened. The story grew in the telling, as stories do. Some versions had Wade catching a dozen arrows, Kayla single-handedly holding off 20 attackers, the cabin standing untouched while bodies piled up around it. But beneath the exaggeration, the core truth remained. A small group of determined people had stood up to the old ways and survived. That alone was enough to inspire hope in others who'd spent their lives accepting oppression as inevitable. On the morning of the third day, Wade and Kayla prepared to ride to Redstone Canyon. They traveled light, armed but not overtly aggressive. 20 volunteers insisted on accompanying them as an honor guard, and Wade didn't have the heart to refuse. As they rode out of the canyon, Wade looked back one last time at the place he'd called home for 15 years. The cabin was still standing, though it would need extensive repairs. The graves of the fallen marked the ground where people had chosen to stand for something bigger than themselves. And somewhere in that battered, blood-stained earth was the seed of something new. A community built on choice instead of compulsion, on respect instead of submission. "What are you thinking?" Kayla asked, riding beside him. "That whatever happens at Redstone, we've already won something. Not the war, maybe, but a battle that mattered. We proved change is possible." Is that enough? If they kill us today, is that enough of a legacy? Wade considered the question seriously. For me? Yeah, I think it is. I came west to die slowly in isolation. Instead, I found a reason to live. Found you, found this fight, found purpose. If it ends today, at least it ends with me standing for something instead of hiding from everything. Kayla reached over and took his hand, a gesture that had become natural over the past weeks. It's not ending today. We're going to go to that canyon, make our case, and change the future of the territories. And then we're going back to your shot-up cabin, and we're going to rebuild it, bigger and better, as a symbol that the old ways are dead and something better is rising. So her certainty was infectious, and Wade found himself believing her despite the odds. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe they were riding to their deaths with hope in their hearts and delusion in their minds. But maybe, just maybe, courage and conviction could accomplish what weapons never could. They reached Redstone Canyon as the sun climbed toward its apex. The natural amphitheater was packed with people, easily 200, maybe more, representatives from every old family, delegates from the settlements, council members, and ordinary folks who'd traveled days just to witness what happened next. Kael was there too, propped up on pillows in a wagon bed, his face gray with pain but his eyes burning with undiminished hatred. Around him clustered the hardliners, the true believers who viewed any compromise with the old ways as betrayal. But there were others too. Wade saw uncertainty in many faces, doubt in eyes that had previously held only blind certainty. The cost of maintaining tradition, the bodies buried after the canyon fight, had shaken faith in ways that words alone never could. The council elder stepped forward, ancient and weathered but standing straight and tall. His voice carried across the canyon without need for shouting. We gather here to decide the future of our territories, to determine whether the old ways that served our grandparents still serve us, or whether the time has come for change. Wade Carter and Kayla Voss have requested the right to speak. By council law and common decency, we grant them this opportunity. Let them be heard without interruption, and then we will deliberate and decide." The elder gestured toward Wade and Kayla. Every eye in the canyon turned to them, waiting. The moment had arrived, the culmination of everything that had started with an impossible arrow catch in the sunset. Now came the harder part. Now came the test that would determine whether violence could give birth to something better or whether blood would only beget more blood. Wade squeezed Kayla's hand one last time, then stepped forward to address the gathered crowd, to make his case for a future where catching arrows meant salvation instead of bondage, where courage could forge freedom from the chains of tradition. Wade's voice carried across the canyon, steady and clear despite the hammering of his heart. 3 months ago, I was a man who wanted nothing more than to be left alone. I'd built a life in isolation because caring about people hurt too much after I lost the ones I loved. Then a wounded woman shot an arrow at me, and I caught it, and everything changed. He paused, letting his eyes sweep across the assembled crowd. Some faces were hostile, others curious, many simply uncertain. I didn't catch that arrow because I'm special or chosen or blessed. I caught it because 15 years of frontier living taught me to react before thinking, to trust my instincts when danger comes. It was luck and reflex, nothing more. But Kayla told me it meant something under your old laws, that it created a bond, a claim. Cale tried to sit up in his wagon, wincing with pain. "It creates ownership," he rasped. "By the oldest law, she became yours to protect or dispose of as you saw fit. That's tradition going back generations." "And that tradition is wrong," Wade said simply. The crowd erupted in angry muttering, but Wade pressed on. "Not because tradition itself is bad, but because this particular tradition treats human beings as property. It assumes women have no agency, no right to determine their own lives. It puts power in the hands of whoever happens to be strongest or quickest or luckiest, regardless of character or merit." An old woman stood from among the settlement delegates, her voice cracking with age but sharp with intelligence. "The old ways kept us alive when this land was trying to kill us. Strong men protecting their families, clear lines of authority, everyone knowing their place. That's what built the territories from nothing." "I respect that," Wade said, and he meant it. The people who came before us survived impossible odds. They created order from chaos, built communities in a wilderness that showed no mercy. But survival and justice aren't always the same thing. Sometimes the rules that help you survive become the chains that keep you from truly living. Kayla stepped forward then, and Wade saw the ripple of reaction move through the crowd. Many had heard about her, but few had actually seen the woman who'd sparked this entire conflict. She stood straight and proud, her voice ringing with conviction. "My name is Kayla Voss. Some of you knew my father, Thomas Voss. He was a good man in many ways, hardworking, fair in his dealings, respected in the community. But he was also a weak man who made a terrible choice when he traded me to Kyle Thorne before I was even born. And you know what? I don't entirely blame him." That surprised the crowd into silence. Even Kale looked taken aback. "I don't blame him," Kayla continued, "because he was following the rules he'd been taught, rules that said women were commodities to be traded for security, for alliance, for advantage, rules that made it normal, even honorable, to treat your own daughter as a bargaining chip. He didn't invent those rules. He inherited them, same as all of you." She walked forward, moving among the crowd now, making eye contact with individuals. "But here's what I learned in 3 months of captivity under those rules. They don't just hurt the women who get claimed. They hurt everyone. They hurt the men who become monsters because they're given absolute power over other human beings. They hurt the children who grow up watching their mothers treated as property and learn that love and ownership are the same thing. They hurt the whole community by wasting half its talent and strength, keeping women locked in roles that serve the system instead of letting them contribute what they're actually capable of." A middle-aged man Wade didn't recognize stood up. "Pretty words, but the old ways maintained order. What you're proposing is chaos, women choosing their own husbands, refusing arranged matches, running away when they don't like their circumstances. How does a community function when there's no structure, no authority?" "We're not proposing chaos," Wade interjected. "We're proposing choice. There's a difference. Let me ask you something. How many of you here in arranged marriages are actually happy? How many wake up every day grateful for the partner your parents chose for you? The silence that followed was telling. A few hands went up, but far fewer than the number of people present. Wade saw the recognition dawn on faces throughout the crowd. The admission that even those who'd benefited from the old ways hadn't necessarily found happiness in them. And how many of you, Kayla added softly, have watched daughters or sisters or cousins go to men they feared? How many have seen the light die in a girl's eyes when she realizes her life is no longer her own? How many have buried women who chose death over bondage? More silence, heavier this time, weighted with grief and guilt. An older man stood, tears streaming down his weathered face. My daughter was 16 when we gave her to the Morrison family. Strong match, good alliance, everything proper according to the old ways. She lasted 2 years before she walked into the river with stones in her pockets. His voice broke. I followed the rules. I did what tradition demanded, and I killed my own child. The confession hung in the air, raw and devastating. Others began to speak then, one after another, stories pouring out like poison from a lanced wound. A woman who'd been claimed at 15 and spent 30 years in quiet misery. A man who'd accepted a girl he didn't want and watched her wither away from loneliness. Young couples torn apart by arrangements made before they were born, forced to live with partners they couldn't love while the people they'd chosen lived in other settlements, married to strangers. The old ways, it turned out, had left a trail of broken hearts and shattered lives that went back generations. The only difference was that no one had ever been allowed to talk about it before. Cale struggled to his feet, one hand pressed to his bandaged side. This is sentiment, not reason? Yes, the old ways can be hard. Life in the territories is hard. But they work. They create stable families, clear lines of inheritance, strong alliances between settlements. What you're proposing, letting women choose freely, breaking arranged matches, abandoning tested traditions, that's a recipe for the collapse of everything we've built. Is it? Wade challenged. Or is that just what you tell yourself to justify maintaining power? Because let's be honest about what the old ways really do. They concentrate power in the hands of men like you, Kyle. They let you accumulate wives like property, build empires on the backs of women who have no choice but to serve you. They make you feel like you've earned something, when really you've just exploited a rigged system. Cale's face went purple with rage. I've built everything I have through strength and will and adherence to tradition. I've protected my people, maintained order, kept the old ways alive when men like you want to destroy them. You call it exploitation. I call it civilization. You call it civilization to keep 5 women prisoner in your compound? Kayla's voice cracked like a whip. To hunt down the one who escaped and try to drag her back? To lead 30 armed men against a handful of defenders whose only crime was believing women deserve freedom? That's not civilization, KL. That's tyranny dressed up in tradition's clothes. The crowd was splitting now. Wade could see it happening. Some still clung to KL's position, their faces hard with the certainty of the faithful. But others were wavering, doubt creeping into eyes that had previously held only conviction. The hardliners clustered together, while those questioning the old ways unconsciously moved toward Wade and Kayla. The council elder raised his hand for silence. This debate could continue for days and settle nothing. We need a decision. The question before us is simple. Do the old ways continue as they have for generations, or do we fundamentally change how the territories operate? I call for a vote among the family heads and settlement representatives. Wait. The voice came from an unexpected source. A young woman Wade recognized from the battle at his canyon. She'd fought in the North Ravine, had taken a bullet through her arm and kept shooting. Before you vote, there's something else you need to know. Something about what happened 3 days ago. She stepped forward, cradling her bandaged arm. My name is Elena Marsh. My father sits on this council, represents the Marsh family holdings. He arranged my marriage to a Thorne cousin when I was 12 years old. I was supposed to go to my husband next spring. She looked at her father, saw him pale. But 3 days ago, I fought alongside Wade Carter and Kayla Voss. I shot 2 men who were trying to kill people fighting for my freedom. And you know what I realized while I was bleeding and reloading and praying I'd survive? I realized I'd rather die fighting for the chance to choose my own life than live safely as someone else's property. Her father stood, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Elena, you were protected, safe. The arrangement with the Thorns would have given you security, status, a good life.
A life you chose, not me. Elena's voice was steady despite the tears on her cheeks. Father, I love you.
I know you thought you were doing the right thing, but I don't want the life you picked. I want to choose my own husband, or not marry at all. I want to use my mind for something other than managing a household. I want to matter for what I can do, not who I belong to. She turned to address the crowd. There were 23 of us at that canyon. 4 died defending the idea that people should be free to choose their own lives. We weren't soldiers or gunfighters or radicals. We were farmers, craftsmen, mothers, young people who just never had anyone tell us that resistance was possible. And we fought, and we bled, and we won. Not because we were stronger than Kael's men, but because we were fighting for something that mattered more than tradition. We were fighting for our humanity. Another voice joined hers, then another. More survivors from the canyon battle, each one telling their story. A mother who'd fought to give her daughters a different future. A young man who'd taken a bullet defending his sister's right to refuse an arranged match. An older couple who'd spent 30 years in a loveless arranged marriage and wanted better for their children. The testimonies built on each other, creating a narrative of lives constrained and hopes deferred and potential wasted, all in service of maintaining traditions that benefited the few at the expense of the many. And through it all, Wade watched the crowd's mood shift like weather changing, the inevitable movement from certainty to doubt to reluctant acceptance. Finally, the council elder spoke again. We have heard testimony from both sides. We have seen the cost of maintaining the old ways, the bodies buried after the canyon fight, the lives damaged by arrangements made without consent, the children lost to despair when tradition crushed hope. We have also heard arguments for stability, for order, for the preservation of structures that built the territories. Now we must decide. He gestured to the family heads and settlement representatives, maybe 40 people in total. Those who wish to maintain the old ways in their entirety stand to my right. Those who wish to abolish them completely and allow full freedom of choice in all matters stand to my left. Those who seek a middle path, preserving what works while reforming what doesn't, stand in the center. For a long moment, no one moved. Then slowly, people began to shift positions. The hardliners moved right without hesitation. Kael's remaining supporters, families whose power depended on arranged marriages and traditional authority. They numbered perhaps a dozen. To the left, the complete reformers gathered. Elena Marsh joined them immediately, as did several other young people and a few older folks whose faces bore the marks of lives lived in quiet suffering. They numbered slightly more than the hardliners, maybe 15, but the center filled with the majority. People who couldn't quite commit to full revolution, but also couldn't stomach the continuation of unmodified tradition. Wade watched them gather, saw the uncertainty in their faces, the desire for change tempered by fear of chaos. The elder surveyed the 3 groups, his ancient face unreadable. The middle path holds the most support. Now we must determine what that path looks like. I propose we hear specific proposals from those who would reform the old ways. Wade Carter, Kayla Voss, you started this. Tell us what you envision. Wade had prepared for this moment during the long nights planning for the council. He and Kayla had debated every point, anticipating objections, crafting compromises that preserved their core principles while acknowledging the legitimate concerns of those who feared change. First, Wade said, no more arranged marriages for anyone under 18. Children deserve the chance to grow up before their lives are decided for them. Murmurs ran through the crowd, but fewer objections than Wade had feared. Even some hardliners seemed to accept this as reasonable. Second, any arrangement made before a person turns 18 can be refused when they reach that age, with no penalty or punishment for the refusal. If both parties still agree to the match, it can proceed, but it has to be mutual choice. More murmuring, louder this time. A hardliner objected. That destroys the certainty of alliances. If arrangements can be broken on a whim. It's not a whim if it's your whole life, Kayla interrupted. And if your alliances can only be maintained by forcing young people into marriages they don't want, maybe those alliances aren't worth maintaining. Wade continued before the objection could escalate. Third, no one can be claimed or owned by another person for any reason, including catching arrows or any other traditional test. The law of the caught arrow, if it's to exist at all, means protection and partnership, not ownership. Both parties must consent freely. Cale finally spoke, his voice weak but venomous. You're dismantling everything that made the territories strong. Without the structure of arranged marriages, how do we maintain alliances? Without claims and bonds, how do we ensure women are protected? Without traditional authority, what prevents chaos? We build new structures, Wade said. Better ones. We make alliances based on shared interests and mutual respect, not forced marriages. We protect people by teaching them to protect themselves and by creating communities where everyone's safety matters, not just the safety of claimed property. We prevent chaos by giving people a stake in the system, reason to support it because it serves them instead of enslaving them. An older woman from the center group spoke up. These proposals sound good in theory, but what about those of us already in arranged marriages? What about existing claims and bonds? Do you propose to just dissolve everything overnight? Kayla addressed this concern. No, we're not asking you to leave marriages you've made peace with or bonds that work for both parties. We're just saying that from this day forward, no new arrangements without mutual consent. And for existing arrangements where one party wants out, there should be a fair process for dissolution that doesn't result in violence or punishment. That's still radical change, someone objected. Yes, Wade agreed, because the system is radically broken, but we're not proposing chaos. We're proposing a transition, a generation to shift from the old ways to new ones. People already married stay married unless both parties want out. Arrangements already made get honored if both parties still agree when they come of age. But no new forced matches, no new claims of ownership, no new tradition of treating people as property. The debate continued for hours. Every proposal was challenged, refined, argued over. The sun climbed to its peak and began its descent while the gathered crowd wrestled with questions that had no easy answers. How to compensate families who'd invested in arrangements that would now be dissolved? What mechanisms would ensure people didn't abuse their new freedom? How to maintain social cohesion when traditional bonds were weakened? Through it all, Wade and Kayla stood firm on their core principles while showing flexibility on implementation. They listened to concerns, acknowledged legitimate fears, offered compromises where they could do so without betraying their fundamental values. And slowly, painfully, a consensus began to emerge. The hardliners remained opposed, but they were increasingly isolated. The reformers wanted to go further than Wade and Kayla proposed, but they accepted that perfect was the enemy of good. And the center group, which held the balance of power, gradually came to see that some change was necessary, that the cost of maintaining pure tradition had become too high. As the sun touched the canyon rim, casting long shadows across the gathering, the council elder called for a formal vote. We have heard all arguments and considered all proposals. The question now is this: do we adopt the reforms proposed by Wade Carter and Kayla Voss as the new law of the territories, to be implemented over the next generation? All family heads and settlement representatives, signify your position. The vote wasn't close. Of the 40 representatives, 32 voted for reform. 6 voted against, the true hardliners who would accept nothing less than complete preservation of the old ways. 2 abstained, unable to choose between conscience and tradition. The elder's voice rang out across the canyon. The motion carries. The old ways, as they have existed, are hereby reformed. The specific proposals will be written into law and distributed to all settlements. Any who refuse to abide by these new laws will be subject to council sanction up to and including exile from the territories. Kyle struggled to his feet one final time, his face twisted with rage and pain. This is betrayal. You're destroying everything our ancestors built, and for what? To appease a handful of malcontents who can't accept their proper place? The elder turned to him, and for the first time Wade saw something like pity in the old man's eyes. KL, you're a relic of a dying age. You can't see that the world has changed, that holding on to power through force and tradition won't work anymore. The canyon fight proved that people will die rather than submit to bondage, even when the odds are against them. You can join us in building something better, or you can cling to the past and be left behind. The choice is yours. There is no choice, Kyle spat. I will not betray everything I believe, everything I've built, because a bunch of cowards lost their nerve. He looked at his remaining supporters, the handful who still believed. Those who honor the true old ways, ride with me. We'll establish our own territory, where tradition still means something, where weakness isn't celebrated and strength is respected. 6 men stood to join him, only 6 out of the dozens who'd followed him just months before. Wade saw the realization hit Kyle, how isolated he'd become, how thoroughly he'd lost. The man who'd once commanded respect across the territories now had a handful of followers and a gunshot wound that would never fully heal. Kyle mounted his horse with obvious pain, his face gray, but his spine straight. This isn't over, Carter. The old ways have survived for generations. They'll survive this temporary madness too. And when your reforms fail, when chaos comes and people remember why tradition mattered, they'll come crawling back to us. Maybe, Wade said, or maybe they'll build something better than either the old ways or what we've proposed today. Maybe they'll surprise us all. That's the thing about freedom, Kyle. You can't predict where it leads. You can only trust that people, given a real choice, will mostly choose well. Kale didn't respond. He simply turned his horse and rode out of Redstone Canyon, his 6 followers trailing behind. They disappeared into the gathering dusk, and Wade wondered if he'd ever see Kyle Thorne again. Probably not, he decided. Men like Kyle didn't adapt or change. They either died fighting the future or faded away into bitter obscurity. As the crowd began to disperse, people approached Wade and Kayla in a steady stream. Some offered thanks, others asked questions about implementation, a few expressed concern about the changes ahead. Wade answered as best he could, but exhaustion was catching up with him. The weight of everything that had happened, the battle, the journey here, the hours of debate, suddenly pressed down on his shoulders like a physical burden. Elena Marsh approached with her father. The older man's face was a battlefield of emotions, pride, fear, grief, hope, all warring for dominance. "Mr. Carter," he said formally, "I want you to know that I voted for the reforms. Not easily, not happily, but I voted for them." "Why?" Wade asked, genuinely curious. Marsh looked at his daughter, and Wade saw love there, complicated but real. "Because when she came home from your canyon with a bullet wound and a light in her eyes I hadn't seen since she was a child, I realized something. I'd been so focused on keeping her safe that I'd been slowly killing everything that made her who she is. The arrangement with the Thorns would have provided security, yes, but it would have crushed her spirit entirely." He turned back to Wade. "I don't know if what you're building will work, but I know the old ways were killing my daughter in slow motion. So yes, I voted for change, even though it terrifies me." Elena embraced her father and Wade looked away, giving them privacy for their reconciliation. He felt Kayla's hand slip into his, a touch that had become familiar over the past months, but which still sent a small thrill through him. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually changed things." "We started the change," Wade corrected. "Finishing it will take years, maybe decades. There'll be resistance, setbacks, people who try to revert to the old ways when no one's watching." "But we started it. That's what matters." She looked up at him, and Wade saw tears gathering in her eyes. Mara would have been proud. All the women who died fighting the old ways, they would have been proud. Wade squeezed her hand, unable to find words adequate to the moment. So instead, he just stood there, holding her hand, watching the sun set over Redstone Canyon for the second time in their strange journey together. The first time, he'd come here to defend an impossible claim. This time, he'd come to transform that claim into something better. A partnership, a collaboration, a shared commitment to building a future where catching arrows meant salvation instead of slavery. The journey back to the canyon took 2 days. Word of the council's decision traveled faster, carried by riders spreading the news to settlements across the territories. By the time Wade and Kayla reached home, they found the cabin already being rebuilt. Volunteers from nearby settlements had gathered, bringing timber and tools and labor. "Figured you'd need help," said Marcus, the farmer's son who'd fought in the battle. His shoulder was still bandaged, but he worked one-handed alongside the others. "After everything you did for us, seemed only right to return the favor." The rebuilding took 3 weeks. The new cabin rose larger than the old one, with a proper second bedroom added to the main structure instead of just a loft. It wasn't fancy. This was still frontier country, and nobody had money for luxuries. But it was solid and weatherproof and built by people who cared. During those weeks, as walls went up and a new roof took shape, Wade and Kayla settled into a rhythm that felt different from before. Not just partners in survival now, but partners in something larger. They planned how to support the refugees who would inevitably come, people fleeing settlements that refused to accept the reforms, young women escaping arranged marriages, couples torn apart by tradition seeking asylum in places where the new laws were actually enforced. "We're becoming something we never intended," Kayla said one evening, watching the sun set from their partially rebuilt porch. "Leaders of a movement, symbols of resistance. I'm not sure I'm cut out for that."
"Nobody's cut out for it until they do it," Wade replied. "You think I plan to become the face of reform in the territories? I just wanted to be left alone in my canyon, but life had other plans." "Do you regret it? Sometimes I wonder if you wish I'd never shot that arrow, never dragged you into all this." Wade considered the question honestly. His life had been simpler before Kayla arrived, certainly quieter. But simpler wasn't better, quieter wasn't healthier.
He'd been dying in slow motion out here, using isolation as a shield against feeling anything at all. "No regrets," he said finally. "You gave me a reason to care again. That's worth all the trouble that came with it." Kayla smiled, that genuine expression that transformed her face from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. "You know what's funny? I shot that arrow trying to kill you. Thought you were one of Kael's men, thought ending you was my only chance at survival. And instead you caught it and gave me something better than survival. You gave me a life worth living." She moved closer, and Wade felt his heart rate pick up in a way that had nothing to do with danger. Over the months, their partnership had deepened into something neither of them had quite named. Friendship, certainly. Trust, absolutely. But there were moments, like this one, with golden light painting her face and her eyes holding his, when Wade felt something more, something that terrified him more than any of Kael's guns ever had. "Kayla," he started, not sure where he was going with the thought. She pressed a finger to his lips. "Don't. Not yet. We've been through too much too fast. I need time to figure out who I am when I'm not running or fighting or surviving. And you need time to be sure this isn't just two damaged people clinging to each other because we're all we've got." Wade knew she was right, but the knowledge didn't ease the disappointment. "So what do we do?" "We keep being partners. We rebuild this cabin and help other people rebuild their lives. We make sure the reforms actually stick and don't just become empty words on paper. And maybe, when enough time has passed and we're both sure of what we want..." She trailed off, but the implication hung between them, full of possibility. "I can work with maybe," Wade said softly. The weeks turned into months. The reforms took hold across the territories. Not without resistance, but with enough support that the old ways began to genuinely fade. Young people refused arranged marriages and faced down angry parents who'd counted on those alliances. Women walked away from claims and bonds that had been forced on them, finding refuge in settlements that honored the new laws. Men who'd built power through traditional authority found that power evaporating as the people they'd controlled discovered they had choices. There were problems, of course. Some settlements refused to accept the changes and became havens for the old ways, attracting those who couldn't adapt. Violence flared occasionally when hardliners tried to enforce tradition through force. The council had to intervene several times, sending peacekeepers to protect people exercising their new freedoms. But slowly, painfully, the territories transformed. New structures emerged to replace the old, voluntary associations instead of forced alliances, partnerships based on mutual respect instead of traditional authority, communities built on shared values instead of rigid hierarchy. And through it all, Wade's Canyon became an unlikely center of the new order. People came seeking advice, mediation, protection, hope. Wade and Kayla found themselves running what amounted to a settlement, though neither of them had intended to. The cabin expanded again, with additional structures added to house refugees and visitors. A small school started, teaching children to read and write and think for themselves. A workshop provided training in trades beyond traditional gender roles, letting people develop skills based on interest and talent instead of assigned place. Elena Marsh became a regular visitor, bringing news from the settlements and helping coordinate the network of safe houses for people fleeing the old ways. Jericho Ash appeared occasionally, never staying long but always bringing valuable information about movements in the hardliner settlements. Even some of Kael's former followers showed up, seeking redemption or at least a fresh start. 6 months after Redstone Canyon, Wade stood on a hill overlooking what his isolated homestead had become. Where once a single cabin had stood in defiant solitude, Now a small community thrived. Maybe 30 people called the canyon home, with dozens more passing through regularly. It wasn't paradise. There were arguments and setbacks and moments when Wade questioned whether they were really building something better or just creating new problems to replace the old ones. But it was alive in a way his old life never had been. It pulsed with energy and hope and the messy vitality of people learning to be free. Kayla found him there as the sun began its descent, her presence as natural and expected as breathing. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the community below. "I got a letter from the council elder," she said eventually. "He wants us to come to the next territorial assembly. Says our presence carries weight, helps reinforce that the reforms are permanent." "What do you think?" "I think I'm tired of being a symbol. But I also think if our presence helps even one more person escape bondage, it's worth the discomfort." Wade nodded. "Then we'll go. Together." "Always together," Kayla agreed, and there was something in her voice, a warmth, an invitation, that made Wade turn to look at her. She met his eyes directly. "It's been 6 months, Wade. I've had time to figure out who I am when I'm not just surviving. And you know what I discovered? I'm someone who wants to build a life with a stubborn, impossibly lucky former sheriff who caught an arrow and changed everything." Wade's breath caught. "Kayla, I'm not asking for marriage or vows or anything traditional," she continued quickly. "I just spent months fighting against forced bonds. I'm not interested in creating new ones, even voluntary ones. But I'm interested in choosing you every day, as long as it works for both of us. As partners, equals, people who care about each other and want to face whatever comes next together." Wade felt something crack open in his chest, some last wall he'd built against caring too much, hoping too hard. "I'm 15 years older than you, set in my ways, not much of a talker." "I don't care about age, I like your ways, and you talk plenty when it matters." She smiled. "Is that a yes?" "That's a definitely, absolutely. Thank you for being patient while I figured out what you already knew, yes." She laughed, the sound bright and clear, and kissed him. It was their first kiss, there on the hill overlooking the community they'd built from desperation and hope and impossible luck. It tasted like promise and possibility, and the future neither of them had believed they'd live to see. When they finally pulled apart, the sun had set fully, and stars were emerging in the darkening sky. Below them, lights flickered to life in the cabin windows, warm against the gathering night. Somewhere, a child laughed. A couple walked hand in hand between buildings. Life, ordinary and extraordinary at once, continuing despite everything that had tried to crush it. "We should head back," Wade said reluctantly. "In a minute." Kayla leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "I want to remember this moment. The day I stopped running and started building. The day we stopped being just partners in survival and became something more." They stood there together as full darkness fell, two people who'd found each other through violence and impossibility, who'd survived battles and councils, and the long, hard work of changing a world that didn't want to change. They'd started with an arrow caught in sunset, and built from that impossible moment a future neither could have imagined. The territories would continue to struggle with reform. The old ways would resist dying for years, maybe generations. There would be setbacks and failures and moments when everything they'd built seemed ready to collapse. But tonight, standing on this hill with Kyla in his arms and a community of free people below them, Wade Carter felt something he hadn't felt since before Sarah and Emma died. He felt hope. Not the fragile kind that shatters at the first challenge, but the deep, resilient kind that survives because it's built on something real. The hope that comes from choosing to stand together against darkness, from believing that courage and conviction can create change, from trusting that even broken people can build something beautiful if they're willing to try. The future was uncertain, the path forward unclear. But they'd face it together, partners in every sense that mattered, building a world where catching arrows meant salvation and choosing freedom was every person's birthright. And that, Wade thought, as they finally walked back down the hill hand in hand, was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The Territorial Assembly 3 weeks later brought together representatives from across the frontier, and Wade and Kayla rode into the gathering with a mixture of anticipation and weariness. The location was different this time, a natural basin near the territorial capital where the council maintained a permanent meeting hall. Unlike Redstone Canyon, this place spoke of civilization's slow creep into the wilderness, with proper buildings and established roads. They arrived to find the atmosphere electric with tension. Word had spread that Kael Thorne's splinter group, those who'd refused to accept the reforms, had been raiding settlements that embraced the new ways, burning homes and kidnapping women they claimed were rightfully bound by the old laws. 3 people had died in the most recent attack, and the council faced mounting pressure to respond with force. The elder greeted them at the hall's entrance, his face lined with worry. "Thank you for coming. The situation is deteriorating faster than I anticipated. The hardliners see the reforms as weakness, an invitation to chaos. They're using violence to prove their point." "What do you want from us?" Wade asked. "Perspective, strategy, hope." The elder gestured toward the hall. "Half the representatives inside want to raise an army and crush Kael's faction by force. The other half want to compromise, water down the reforms to appease the hardliners. Both approaches will fail. The first will start a civil war that could destroy the territories. The second will betray everything we voted for. I need someone who understands both sides to find a third path." Inside the hall, the debate raged with the intensity of a wildfire. Representatives shouted over each other, fists pounded tables, and the careful consensus that had emerged at Redstone Canyon seemed on the verge of shattering completely. A red-faced rancher was on his feet, his voice booming. "My daughter was taken from her bed 3 nights ago, stolen by men claiming the old law gave them the right. You want me to sit here and debate philosophy while she's out there being—" He couldn't finish, choking on rage and fear. A woman countered, "And my son was killed trying to defend his sister from a raid. I want justice same as you, but raising an army just creates more orphans and widows. There has to be another way." Wade listened to the argument spiral, each one valid, each one incomplete. Violence had been done and demanded response, but responding with more violence would only perpetuate the cycle. Yet doing nothing would embolden the hardliners and prove that the new laws had no teeth. Kayla's hand tightened on his arm. "They need to hear from us, from people who've actually fought this battle." Wade nodded and stood, his movement cutting through the chaos more effectively than shouting. The hall gradually quieted as people recognized him. The man who'd caught the impossible arrow, who'd held off Kael's assault, who'd become an unlikely symbol of reform. "You're debating whether to fight or compromise," Wade said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "But those aren't the only options. There's a third path, harder than either, but more likely to actually solve the problem." "And what's that?" someone called out. "We destroy their sanctuary." Wade looked around the hall, meeting eyes. Kael and his followers have been raiding from a base somewhere in the high country. They strike fast and retreat to safety, counting on the fact that we don't know where they are and can't organize a response quickly enough to catch them. But what if we did know? What if we went to them, not with an army, but with something more powerful? We went with truth. Skeptical murmurs rippled through the crowd. The rancher whose daughter had been taken shook his head. "Truth doesn't rescue my girl from whatever hell she's in right now." "No, but force of arms might get her killed before you reach her," Kayla interjected, standing beside Wade. "I escaped from Kael's compound once. I know how these places work, how they're defended, how the women inside are treated. If you attack with an army, the first thing Kael will do is use his captives as shields or bargaining chips. You'll start a siege that could last months and end with everyone dead." "So what do you suggest?" the woman who'd lost her son asked. Wade had been formulating this plan during the ride to the assembly, turning it over in his mind, examining it from every angle. It was risky, maybe insane, but it was the only approach that didn't guarantee more bloodshed. "Kayla and I go in alone, not as attackers, but as witnesses. We document what's happening in Kael's compound, talk to the women being held there, record their testimonies. Then we bring that truth back here and spread it across every settlement in the territories. We make it impossible for anyone to claim the old ways are about protection or tradition. We show exactly what they really are." "You'll be killed the moment you set foot in his compound," someone objected. "Maybe. Or maybe Kael will see an opportunity. He's always been obsessed with proving he was right, that his interpretation of the old ways is the only valid one. Give him a platform to make his case publicly, and he might just take it." Wade paused. "And while he's grandstanding, we'll be talking to the women he's holding, gathering evidence, building a case that destroys his moral authority completely." The elder considered this, his ancient face thoughtful. It's extraordinarily dangerous. You'd be putting yourselves entirely in Kyle's power, trusting that his pride will outweigh his desire for revenge. I know, Wade acknowledged, but I also know that we can't build a better future by repeating the mistakes of the past. The old ways survived through force and fear. If we defeat them with force and fear, we just become what we're fighting against. We have to prove that truth and justice can triumph without becoming oppressors ourselves. Kayla added, "Besides, I escaped once. I can do it again if necessary, and this time I'll have Wade with me." The debate continued for hours, but gradually Wade's plan gained support. The alternatives, civil war or capitulation, both carried such obvious costs that even those who thought Wade's approach was suicidal had to admit it was worth trying first. Finally, as the sun began to set, the assembly voted. Wade and Kylo would be given 2 weeks to infiltrate KL's compound, gather evidence, and return. If they failed or didn't return, the assembly would convene again to consider military options. As the meeting broke up, the rancher whose daughter had been taken approached Wade, his eyes haunted. "Her name is Rebecca. She's 17, scared of loud noises, loves horses. If you see her in there, tell her. Tell her we're coming for her. Tell her to hold on." "I will," Wade promised, knowing the weight of that promise, the possibility he might not be able to keep it. They spent 3 days preparing. Jericho Ash appeared as if summoned by instinct, offering crucial intelligence about the compound's location and layout. It's in the Devil's Teeth Mountains, 3 days hard ride north, natural fortress, high walls on 3 sides, only one approach that doesn't require climbing equipment. Kale's got maybe 40 people there now, half of them true believers, half just scared folks who think the old ways are the only thing keeping them safe. "And the women?" Kayla asked. Jericho's face darkened. 12 last I heard. Some taken in raids, others handed over by families who rejected the reforms. Kyle treats them like prizes, proof that the old ways still have power. He met Kayla's eyes. "It's worse than when you were there. He's angry now, humiliated, trying to prove something. The women bear the brunt of that." Wade saw Kayla's jaw tighten, saw the determination settle into her features like steel cooling into shape. "Then we end it. Not with violence if we can help it, but we end it." They rode out on a gray morning, just the two of them, armed but not aggressively so. The journey north took them through increasingly rugged country, the kind of terrain that had always attracted those running from civilization or justice. On the 3rd day, as they climbed into the high mountains, they began to see signs of habitation, cleared trails, cut timber, the distant smoke of cooking fires. The compound appeared suddenly as they crested a ridge. It was exactly as Jericho had described. A collection of rough buildings clustered in a natural bowl, surrounded by steep slopes on 3 sides. Guards patrolled the perimeter, and Wade counted at least a dozen armed men visible from their position. "Last chance to turn back," Wade said quietly. Kayla shook her head. "Forward is the only direction that matters." They descended openly, making no attempt at stealth. The guards spotted them immediately, rifles raised, shouting warnings. Wade kept his hands visible and his pace steady, Kayla riding beside him with the same careful calm. A guard challenged them 50 yards from the compound's entrance. "That's far enough. State your business." "Wade Carter and Kayla Voss to see Cale Thorne," Wade called back. "We've come to talk." The guard's eyes widened in recognition, then narrowed with suspicion. "You've got some nerve showing your face here, Carter." "After what you did, after I shot him in defense of my home?" Wade interrupted. "Yeah, I imagine he's not happy about that. But I'm not here to fight. I'm here because the Territorial Assembly sent us to hear Kyle's side of the story, to document his perspective on the reforms. He's been saying the council made a mistake. We're giving him a chance to prove it." The guard hesitated, clearly unsure. Finally, he gestured to another man. "Stay here. I'll ask Kale if he wants to see you." The wait stretched out, tense and uncertain. Wade used the time to study the compound's layout, noting defensive positions, possible escape routes, the locations of the buildings where captives would likely be held. Beside him, Kayla sat utterly still, her face composed but her eyes cataloging every detail. The guard returned with an answer that surprised Wade. "Kyle will see you, but you're to be disarmed and escorted at all times. Any sign of treachery, and you'll both be shot. Understood?" "Understood," Wade agreed, handing over his rifle and pistol. Kayla did the same,
her movements deliberate and calm. They were led through the compound's gates into a world frozen in time. Everything here reflected the old ways taken to their logical extreme, women moving with downcast eyes, men strutting with the confidence of unquestioned authority, children watching silently from doorways. It was a society built entirely on hierarchy and force, and it made Wade's skin crawl.
Kyle waited in the largest building, a rough-hewn hall that aspired to grandeur but achieved only pretension. He sat in a heavy chair that might have been meant as a throne, his injured side carefully supported, his face gaunt from pain and anger, but his eyes still burned with the absolute certainty of the fanatic. "Well, well," he said as they were brought before him. "The great reformers, come to visit the past they tried to destroy. Should I be honored or insulted?" "Neither," Wade said evenly. "We're here because the Territorial Assembly wants to understand both sides of this conflict. You've been saying the reforms will destroy the territories. We're giving you a chance to explain why, to make your case to people who might still be persuaded." Cale studied them, suspicion and curiosity warring on his face. "Why would you do that? You won at Redstone. The council sided with you. Why give me a platform now?" "Because winning a vote doesn't settle a question this fundamental," Kayla said. "Half the territories still believe in the old ways, maybe more. If we're going to build a lasting peace, we need people to choose the new path because they understand both options, not just because the council told them to. You're the most eloquent defender of tradition left. Let people hear your arguments directly instead of through rumors and raids." It was a calculated appeal to Kyle's vanity, and Wade saw it land. The man had always seen himself as more than just the enforcer of tradition. He saw himself as its philosopher, its prophet, the keeper of eternal truths. The chance to make his case to a wider audience, to be taken seriously as a thinker rather than just a thug, clearly appealed to him. "Very well," Kyle said finally. "I'll talk to you. Explain why the old ways matter, why abandoning them will lead to chaos and suffering. But you'll hear more than just my words. You'll see how we live here, how order and structure create safety and prosperity. You'll see what you've been trying to destroy." Over the next 3 days, Kyle subjected them to an exhaustive tour of his vision of the old ways. He showed them the compound's organization, the division of labor, the clear hierarchies that governed every interaction. He introduced them to men who spoke glowingly of traditional authority and the security it provided. He presented carefully rehearsed testimonies from women who claimed to be content in their roles, grateful for male protection and guidance. But Kyle made a crucial mistake. In his eagerness to prove his point, he gave Wade and Kayla access to the entire compound, confident that what they'd see would validate his worldview. And in the gaps between his orchestrated presentations, they saw the truth. They saw women with bruises they tried to hide, children who flinched at raised voices, men who enforced obedience with the casual cruelty of those who'd never been held accountable. They saw Rebecca, the rancher's daughter, her spirit not yet broken, but bending under the weight of captivity. They saw the other women taken in raids, some resigned to their fate, others burning with quiet rage. And they talked to them. Carefully, quietly, in moments when guards weren't watching closely, Wade and Kayla collected testimonies. They learned names and stories, documented abuses, gathered evidence of systematic violence hidden behind the facade of tradition and order. Kayla was particularly effective at this. The women recognized her, remembered her escape, and saw in her their own possibility of freedom. They whispered their truths to her in corners and during work periods, trusting her with stories they'd never dared speak aloud. On the 4th day, Kyle gathered his entire compound for what he clearly intended as his triumphant moment. A public debate where he would definitively prove the superiority of the old ways. He'd invited representatives from nearby hardliner settlements, maybe 70 people in total, all believers in traditional authority. "You claim the old ways are about oppression," Kale began, his voice ringing with conviction despite his weakened state. "But look around you. See the order, the purpose, the clarity of roles and responsibilities. Men protect, women nurture, children learn their proper place. Everyone has security. Everyone has purpose. Compare that to your chaos, where people chase individual desires without regard for community needs, where traditional bonds are broken on whims, where disorder masquerades as freedom." Wade let him talk, nodding occasionally as if considering the arguments. Kyle grew more animated, his audience more engaged. He painted a picture of the reforms as the beginning of societal collapse, of the old ways as the only defense against descending into anarchy. Finally, when Kyle paused for breath, Wade stood. You make passionate arguments, Kale. You talk about order and security and purpose. But I notice you've been very careful about which people we've spoken to, which parts of the compound we've seen. So before we discuss philosophy, let's discuss facts. He pulled out the notebook where he and Kayla had documented their observations. Rebecca Marsh, age 17, taken from her family's ranch 8 days ago. She hasn't been claimed yet, but 3 different men have told her she'll be given to whoever proves most loyal to you. She's terrified, can't sleep, cries every night when she thinks no one's listening. Kale's face darkened. She's being given time to adjust, to understand her new role. That's mercy, not cruelty.
Sarah Mitchell, Kayla continued, reading from her own notes. Age 22, handed over by her father who refused to accept the reforms. She's been here 6 weeks. In that time, she's been beaten twice for defiance, once for refusing to call her claimant master, once for trying to send a letter to her sister. She has bruises on her ribs and a black eye she tried to hide with powder. Discipline maintains order, Kyle said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. You're twisting things, Kyle protested, taking isolated incidents and making them sound like a pattern? Kayla interrupted. Because it is a pattern. The same pattern I saw when I was held in your previous compound. The same pattern that's been repeated in every settlement that clings to the old ways. You dress it up in fancy language about tradition and order, but underneath it's just men using power to control women, justified by customs that should have died generations ago. She turned to address the crowd directly. I was where those 12 women are now. I know what it's like to be told that bondage is protection, that submission is safety, that the bruises are for your own good. And I'm here to tell you that it's a lie. All of it. The old ways don't protect women. They protect men's power over women. They don't create order. They create fear dressed up as respect. They don't preserve anything worth preserving. A woman in the crowd stood up, her face anguished. My daughter is here. You've been keeping her from me, saying she needs to learn proper behavior before she can have visitors. I want to see her now. Other voices joined hers. Where is Rebecca Marsh? Let her speak for herself. Show us these women you claim are content. Let them tell us their truth. Kyle tried to maintain control, but the moment was slipping away from him. This is exactly the chaos I warned about. People questioning proper authority, demanding things they have no right to. They have every right, Wade said quietly but firmly. The right to see their daughters, to hear the truth, to question authority that's been abused. That's not chaos, Kyle. That's justice. The compound erupted into shouting. Some of Kyle's true believers tried to restore order, but others, those who'd come out of fear rather than conviction, started demanding answers. The guards didn't know whether to defend against external threats or internal rebellion. In the confusion, Kayla moved. She'd been watching for an opportunity, and now she took it. She slipped through the crowd to where the captive women were being held under guard. Rebecca Marsh, she called out, your father sent me. He's coming for you. Hold on just a little longer. The guards moved to stop her, but other women from the crowd blocked their path. Let them speak, someone shouted. Let the girls tell their own stories. What happened next unfolded with the inevitability of a dam breaking. The captive women emerged, some pushed forward by supporters, others stepping out on their own despite their fear. They told their stories of kidnapping, coercion, abuse, and the systematic destruction of hope. Not in private whispers anymore, but in public testimony that the crowd couldn't ignore or explain away. Rebecca spoke of being torn from her bed in the night. Sarah showed her bruises. Anna described watching her spirit die slowly day by day. Their testimonies were damning, specific, impossible to dismiss as misunderstanding or exaggeration. Kyle tried to speak, to explain, to justify, but his words rang hollow against the accumulated weight of truth. The crowd turned on him, not with violence, but with something more devastating, disillusionment. The people who'd followed him, who'd believed his vision of the old ways as noble and necessary, suddenly saw what Wade and Kayla had been trying to show them all along. They saw the cost of tradition, the brutality hidden behind philosophical arguments, the human suffering justified by abstract principles. One of Kael's lieutenants, a man who'd been at his side for years, threw down his rifle. I can't do this anymore. I thought we were preserving something good, but this? He gestured at the weeping women, at the evidence of systematic abuse. This isn't honor. This is just cruelty with a fancy name. Others followed. Not all. Some hardliners clung to Kael and their beliefs, unable or unwilling to admit they'd been wrong. But enough deserted that Kael's power base crumbled in the space of an hour. Wade approached Kael directly, his voice low enough that only the broken leader could hear. It's over. You can accept that gracefully and let these women go free, or we can wait for the territorial peacekeepers to arrive and force the issue. But either way, the old ways end here, today, in this compound. Kael looked at him with eyes full of hatred and something that might have been recognition. You've destroyed everything I built. No, you destroyed it yourself when you chose power over people, tradition over humanity. I just made sure everyone else could see what you'd become. The aftermath took days to sort out. The women held captive were freed and reunited with their families. Those who'd come to the compound voluntarily were offered safe passage out if they wanted it. Some took it, others chose to stay and try to rebuild something better. Kael himself was placed under territorial authority, to be tried for kidnapping and other crimes under the new laws. As Wade and Kayla prepared to leave, Rebecca Marsh approached them. The fear in her eyes had been replaced by something harder and more resilient. The beginnings of strength forged in adversity. Thank you, she said simply, for coming for us, for not giving up. Thank your father, Kayla replied. He's the one who wouldn't accept losing you. We just did what we could to bring you home. They rode out of the mountain compound as dawn broke, carrying with them the documented testimonies that would be spread across the territories. The evidence would be damning, impossible for even the most dedicated traditionalists to ignore or explain away. The old ways wouldn't die overnight. Change never happened that fast, but they'd been dealt a blow from which they could never fully recover. The journey back took 4 days. They rode in comfortable silence much of the time, processing what they'd witnessed and accomplished. On the final night before reaching home, they made camp in a small canyon that reminded Wade of the place where this had all begun. As they sat by the fire, Kayla said quietly, I keep thinking about the women who thanked us, how desperate they were for someone to care, to fight for them, to prove that their suffering mattered. We did what we could, Wade said. I know, but it's not enough, is it? We can change laws and dismantle Kael's compound, but there are other compounds, other men like him, other women suffering in silence. The work isn't done. Wade poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. The work is never done. That's the thing about building a better world. It's not a destination you reach and then relax. It's a constant process of pushing back against the forces that want to drag us backward. That sounds exhausting. It is. But it's also the only work that really matters. Kayla leaned against him, and Wade wrapped his arm around her shoulders. They'd grown past the careful distance of their early partnership into something deeper and more comfortable. Not possessive or consuming, but steady and real. The kind of love that grows from shared struggle and mutual respect. When we get back, Kayla said, I want to do something. Something symbolic to mark the end of the old ways and the beginning of whatever comes next. What did you have in mind? The arrow. The one I shot at you that started all of this. I want to burn it, not to destroy the memory, but to transform it, to turn the symbol of bondage into a symbol of freedom. Wade remembered the arrow, still carefully preserved in the cabin. That feels right. A ritual ending to mark a real beginning. They reached home 2 days later to find the canyon community thriving. News of what had happened at Kael's compound had already arrived, carried by fast riders, and people greeted Wade and Kayla as returning heroes. But Wade could see the understanding in their eyes. This wasn't the end of the fight, just the end of one battle in a much longer war. That evening, as the sun set over the canyon walls, they gathered the community for the ceremony Kayla had envisioned. She brought out the arrow that Wade had caught in that impossible moment months ago, holding it up for everyone to see. This arrow was supposed to kill a man I thought was my enemy, she said, her voice carrying clearly. Instead, he caught it and gave me something I'd never had, a real choice about my own life. That moment changed everything, not just for me and Wade, but for all of us here.
for the entire territories. She walked to the fire pit where a blaze had been built up, but keeping this arrow feels like holding on to bondage, even in memory. The old law said that catching it created ownership. We've proven that law wrong, shown that bonds of choice are stronger than bonds of force. Now I want to end this symbol's power once and for all. Kayla held the arrow over the flames. For a moment, the wood seemed to resist the heat, remaining whole and intact. Then it caught, fire racing along the shaft, consuming the feathers, blackening the point. She held it until the heat became unbearable, then let it fall into the fire. The crowd watched in silence as the arrow burned. Wade stepped forward and took Kayla's hand, not claiming her, not binding her, just standing beside her as an equal partner. Together, they watched the flames transform the arrow from a weapon into ash, from a symbol of bondage into a mark of liberation. When the arrow was fully consumed, Elena Marsh spoke up. What do we build now? The old ways are dying. Kael's power is broken. The reforms are taking hold. But what comes next? What do we become? Wade considered the question carefully. We become something that's never existed before in the territories, a society built on choice instead of compulsion, where people form bonds because they want to, not because tradition demands it, where everyone has a voice and a stake in the future, regardless of gender or birth or circumstance. That's idealistic, someone said, not hostile but realistic. People are still people. We'll make mistakes, have conflicts, struggle to figure out how this new world works. Absolutely, Kayla agreed. But we'll make those mistakes as free people, not as slaves to tradition. We'll have conflicts between equals, not between masters and property. We'll struggle together to build something better, not struggle alone against a system designed to keep us powerless. The gathering gradually dispersed, people drifting back to their homes with thoughtful expressions. Wade and Kayla remained by the fire, watching the embers glow. Do you think it'll work? Kayla asked. This new world we're building? I think it has a chance. More than that, it has committed people willing to fight for it. Wade pulled her closer. And that's really all any new thing needs. People who care enough to keep trying even when it's hard. Over the following months, the territories transformed in ways both dramatic and subtle. The documented evidence from Kael's compound spread like wildfire, destroying what remained of the old way's moral authority. Settlements that had resisted the reforms found themselves unable to defend their positions in the face of overwhelming testimony. Young people refused arranged marriages in numbers that made enforcement impossible. Women who'd spent years in bondage walked away, and the families who might once have dragged them back found their communities no longer supported such actions. There were setbacks, of course. Some remote settlements still clung to traditional ways, isolated pockets of resistance that would take years to fully integrate. A few hardliners tried to start new compounds, but they couldn't attract enough followers to sustain themselves. Violence flared occasionally when old beliefs clashed with new realities. But the overall direction was clear. The territories were evolving, however painfully, towards something resembling genuine freedom and equality. Schools opened that taught both girls and boys. Women began taking roles in settlement governance. Marriages based on mutual choice became the norm rather than the exception. The old hierarchies didn't disappear overnight, but they lost their absolute power, their ability to dictate lives without question. Wade and Kayla became reluctant symbols of this transformation, though they tried to resist that role. They preferred to work quietly, helping refugees establish new lives, mediating disputes between traditionalists and reformers, building the practical infrastructure of a changing society. Their canyon community grew into something like a model settlement, not perfect, but functional, where people of different backgrounds and beliefs learned to coexist without one group dominating the others. A year after the arrow burned, the Territorial Assembly convened again, this time to draft a formal constitution that would replace the old customary laws. Wade and Kayla attended as observers rather than participants, content to let a new generation of leaders shape the specific details of governance. During a break in the proceedings, the council elder approached them. He looked older than ever, the weight of shepherding such fundamental change clearly taking its toll. I wanted to thank you both, he said quietly. When you came to Redstone Canyon with that impossible story about catching an arrow, I thought we were dealing with an interesting legal curiosity. I never imagined it would catalyze the complete transformation of our society. We didn't imagine it either, Wade admitted. We were just trying to survive, to find a way for Kayla to be free without starting a war. And in the process, you freed thousands of others. That's the way change often happens. Not through grand plans, but through ordinary people refusing to accept injustice, finding courage in impossible moments. The elder smiled. The Constitution they're drafting in there, it's good work. Flawed, certainly, but better than anything that came before. And it exists because you two showed us that change was possible. After he left, Kayla turned to Wade.
Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't caught that arrow? If you just let it hit you, or dodged, or any of 1,000 other possible responses? Sometimes. I'd probably be dead, you'd probably be back with Kyle or dead yourself, and the territories would still be operating under the old ways. Wade shook his head. But dwelling on alternate histories doesn't accomplish much. We can only work with the world we actually have. True. But I'm grateful for this world, for the impossible catch that gave us a chance to build something better. The Constitution was ratified 3 days later, enshrining in formal law the principles Wade and Kyla had fought for. Freedom of choice in marriage, equal rights regardless of gender, protection for those fleeing bondage, and mechanisms for peaceful change rather than violent enforcement of tradition. It wasn't perfect, and implementation would be messy and contested, but it represented a fundamental shift in how the territories conceived of human rights and social organization. They rode home from the assembly as summer was settling into the high country, the canyon walls golden in the long evening light. Their community had continued to grow, maybe 50 permanent residents now, with a steady flow of visitors and refugees. They'd built a proper meeting hall, expanded the school, even started a small library with books donated from settlements across the territories. As they approached, children ran out to greet them, shouting questions about the assembly. Women and men working together in the fields waved. The scene was ordinary and extraordinary at once. A community functioning on principles of mutual respect and shared purpose, proof that the ideals they'd fought for could actually work in practice. That night, after the community had settled into sleep, Wade and Kayla sat on their porch watching the stars emerge. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together at the end of each day, a space to process and plan and simply be. I've been thinking, Kayla said, about the future. Not the territory's future, but ours. Wade felt his heart rate pick up slightly. What about it? We've been partners for over a year now, fought together, built together, survived impossible things together, and somewhere along the way, partnership turned into something more. Something I don't quite have words for. Love, Wade said simply. It's called love, Kayla. The kind that sneaks up on you while you're busy doing other things, that grows from respect and trust instead of starting with passion and hoping the rest follows. She smiled. Yes, that. And I've been thinking that maybe it's time to acknowledge it publicly, not because tradition demands it or law requires it, but because I want to. I want to stand in front of our community and choose you, formally and officially, as my partner in everything. Wade felt emotion well up, unexpected and overwhelming. A wedding? A partnership ceremony. No one giving me away because I'm not property to be transferred. No vows of obedience or submission. Just two people committing to face the future together, as equals, for as long as it works for both of us. She took his hand. What do you think? Wade thought about all the years he'd spent alone, convinced he'd never care about anyone again after losing Sarah and Emma. He thought about the impossible arrow that had shattered his isolation and brought this extraordinary woman into his life. He thought about everything they'd built together, not just the physical structures of the canyon community, but the larger architecture of a changing society. I think that sounds perfect, he said, his voice rough with emotion. When? Next month, at the autumn equinox. A ceremony marking balance, day and night equal, summer and winter in transition, old ways and new meeting in the middle. Seems appropriate. They planned the ceremony together, making decisions jointly about every detail. It would be simple but meaningful, held in the canyon with their community as witnesses. No elaborate rituals or ancient traditions, just honest words spoken freely between two people choosing each other. The month passed quickly, filled with preparations and the ordinary work of running a growing settlement. On the morning of the equinox, Wade woke to find the canyon bathed in perfect golden light, warm but not hot, still but not stagnant. weather that felt like the world itself was blessing their choice.
The ceremony was held at sunset, the time when Wade had caught Kayla's arrow all those months ago. The community gathered in the natural amphitheater they'd built for meetings and celebrations. No priest or official presided, just Wade and Kayla, standing together, speaking their truth. Kayla went first, her voice clear and steady. "Wade Carter, you caught an arrow that was meant to kill you and turned it into an opportunity to save me. Not because you wanted to own me or claim me, but because you saw someone who needed help and you chose to give it. In the years since, you've proven yourself to be exactly the person I hoped you were. Strong without being domineering, principled without being rigid, capable of great love without demanding possession. I choose you as my partner, my equal, my companion in building a better world. I make this choice freely, and I'll remake it every day for as long as we both shall live." Wade's turn came, and he found his voice thick with emotion. "Kayla Voss, you came into my life with an impossible arrow and an even more impossible courage. You'd survived things that would have broken most people, and instead of becoming bitter or cruel, you channeled your pain into fighting for others still trapped in bondage. You showed me that caring about people was worth the risk of loss, that isolation wasn't safety, but just slow death. I choose you as my partner, my equal, my reminder that even in the harshest country, love and freedom can flourish if we're brave enough to fight for them. I make this choice freely, and I'll honor it with every breath." They exchanged rings, simple bands they'd made themselves from silver mined in the canyon. Not symbols of ownership, but reminders of choice, of commitment freely given and freely maintained. Elena Marsh, representing the community, spoke briefly. "We witness this partnership and celebrate it. May your choice to stand together strengthen you both and inspire others to build relationships based on respect rather than compulsion, love rather than obligation, freedom rather than bondage." As the sun touched the canyon rim, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold, Wade and Kayla kissed to the cheers and applause of their community. It was a moment of pure joy, untainted by the violence and struggle that had brought them here, a moment that proved all the fighting had been worth it. The celebration continued long into the night, with music and dancing and storytelling. People shared their own stories of escape and transformation, of leaving the old ways behind and embracing uncertain freedom. Rebecca Marsh danced with the young man she'd chosen to court, their relationship built on mutual attraction instead of parental arrangement. Elena spoke of her plans to start a newspaper that would spread ideas across the territories. Jericho Ash, who'd somehow gotten wind of the ceremony and shown up uninvited, raised a toast to unlikely heroes and impossible arrows. Late in the night, after most people had drifted off to bed, Wade and Kayla stood once more on their porch, looking out at the canyon that had become so much more than Wade's isolated refuge. "Happy?" Wade asked. "Beyond measure," Kayla replied. "Not because everything's perfect, it's not. There are still people suffering under the old ways, still hardliners who'll never accept change, still so much work to do. But we're doing it together, as partners, surrounded by people who believe in the same things we do. That's more than I ever dreamed possible when I was running through the wilderness with an infected wound, thinking I'd probably die before I ever reached safety." Wade pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest. "You know what's strange? I spent 15 years here trying to forget I was alive, trying to exist without feeling. Then you showed up and forced me to feel everything, fear and anger and hope and love, all the messy emotions I'd been hiding from. And it turns out that's what life actually is. Not the numb safety I'd built, but the vulnerable, terrifying, beautiful chaos of caring about people and causes and futures that aren't guaranteed. No regrets? Not a single one." They stood there together as the stars wheeled overhead, two people who'd started as strangers bound by an impossible arrow and had become partners in every sense that mattered. The canyon was quiet around them, peaceful in the way that places are when people have fought for them and won the right to call them home. The territories would continue to change and evolve. The old ways would continue to die slowly, resisting at every step but ultimately losing to the inevitable march of progress. There would be more battles, more struggles, more moments when the future they were building seemed impossible to achieve. But none of that mattered tonight. Tonight was about celebrating the choice two people had made to stand together, to build a life based on freedom and respect, and the kind of love that survives because it's freely given rather than demanded. As the first light of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, Wade and Kayla finally went inside, to the home they'd built together, in the community they'd created, in the world they'd helped transform. The arrow that had brought them together was long since ash, its power transformed from bondage to liberation, its impossible catch turned into the foundation of something better than tradition, stronger than compulsion, more enduring than any law written by those who valued control over freedom. They had caught an arrow in the sunset and turned it into sunrise. And that, Wade thought as he held Kayla close and let sleep claim him, was the best impossible thing he'd ever done.